Looks like. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. This meeting of the Hayward City Council is being held consistent with State of California Executive Order number 29-20 dated March 17th, 2020, and Alameda County Health Officer Order number 20-10 dated April 29th, 2020. The City Council, members of the City Council will be participating in this public meeting via in most cases, video conferencing here. We are having some technical difficulties tonight regarding our Channel 15 broadcast. So the meeting is not available this evening over Channel 15, but it will be rebroadcast later this week on Channel 15, and it will be also available later this week on our website. For now, we are live streaming from our website or YouTube. You can watch it via YouTube. And with that, I'm going to call this meeting to order. And I will ask Councilmember Salinas to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Are you, Councilmember Salinas, you need to unmute if you're going to do that.
Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Madam City Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, Madam Mayor. Good evening,
Mayor,
council members and all attendees. Councilmember Lamnin.
Present.
Councilmember Mendel.
Here.
Councilmember Marquez.
Present.
Councilmember Salinas.
Present.
Councilmember Wahab.
Here.
Councilmember Cermeño.
Present.
Mayor Halliday.
Here.
Thank you. All 7 members present.
Thank you. The council did hold a closed session just before this meeting, and we were again continuing our discussions of our annual duty to review our council appointed officers. In this case tonight, we discussed both the city attorney and the city manager. I will say we are making great progress on these reviews, which were delayed by COVID and all that has ensued. But we did discuss both of those items, and we took no reportable action. And that is the report on the closed session for this evening. So now is the time for public comments, and I'm going to turn this over to our city clerk, who can tell you how you can make a public comment and let us know if we have any right now. Madam City Clerk?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. And as you stated, this is the time for our members of the public who wish to speak to either using the Zoom application to raise the hand function, or for those who are joining via call to dial 9 to raise their hand, and start 9 to raise their hand, and star 6 to unmute. If you are calling, your area code and the last 3 digits of your phone number will be called when it's time for you to speak. When called to speak, please begin by stating your name and limit your remarks to 3 minutes. And as I can see from the participants, we have attendees, which is great. We have 11 of them. And I see one person who has the hand raised. And Patrick is the first person that I see. Please go ahead and unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm using headphones that don't have a mic. I wasn't sure if it's picking up on the phone, the computer or not. First of all, I'd like to thank Council Members Mendel and Salinas and not showing up right now. That showed up on Sunday to Weeks Park to give us a little bit of update for the Patrick Avenue restriping. I felt like our concerns were heard. I do agree that there will need to be some adjustment period, but I know my truck parked out in front of my house on Patrick Avenue, third house up from Tennyson Road. In 3 days it's been out, it has been almost hit 4 times already. I've had 5 cars pass it on the right. I've almost been hit by cars wanting to make left-hand turns where they used to stop because they're not sure where things are, walking my dog across Patrick. So I know there's no way we're not going to have a bike lane on Patrick, but I really think you people that have kids need to come out and park your car and watch the people go by as they're in front of my house. The cars are parked over 10 feet from the curb. It's just crazy. I know we're going to have a bike lane, but I would really like to have the parking next to the curb, then the bike lane, then the buffer, because when I open up the door on my truck, I can only open it about that far to squeeze out if any traffic's coming up. And if I wait for all the traffic to go by, as soon as I think it's stopped, somebody comes off of Tennyson Road from westbound Tennyson, catches the green light, and is on full throttle, and I'm jumping up because at that point there, I'm out of my truck, I'm a pedestrian. So pedestrians out of the right of way, the people don't like it. So it just, the parking situation is bad. The other night we had, Friday night we had a fire engine had to report across the street. If in front of my house, if I'm parked in front of my house, my daughter can use my driveway to get my grandkids out, the fire engine's blocking all the traffic. So it wasn't well thought out for how little bike traffic is actually going to be. I do, the quality of work that the stripers did is very good. I'm not going to deny that. The quality of work where they did. Didn't like that we weren't notified the day before so that we weren't parked and that would have stopped a lot of the double parking up near St. Bede's at the north end of Patrick Avenue, which people are still double parking using the street parking and the curb parking. So we need to get those little flyers out as soon as possible so people don't continue to park in the curb. And that's it. Thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Are there any other public speakers, Madam City Clerk?
Yes, and Mayor, we have Alicia. If you could please go ahead and unmute yourself, Alicia.
Okay. Hi, this is Alicia Lawrence. In some emails that I had received via public request, essentially Councilmember Salinas, in my opinion, used his council email to campaign against some of the people challenging him in this election. And I would just like to see the city council make a statement denouncing that practice and make a commitment that that is an unethical practice, that no council member now or in the future will engage in such a practice again. To my knowledge, the practice that Councilmember Salinas engaged in is outside of the purview of the FPPC. It is not something that is technically addressed in any of the code of ethics. By the way, thank you to the city clerk, the city attorney, and the city manager for being so prompt in responding to me when I raised this with them. And so I'm bringing this to the council because I would like to see the council make a statement and to denounce the use of city resources, city email, in campaigning against the people who are challenging you in the election. Not only did Councilmember Salinas name the challengers, but he also made a qualitative statement about their abilities. So again, I'm calling on you, Mayor Halliday, and your colleagues to denounce that use of city resources, city email, and to make a statement. And I know the rules. I know no one can speak about it right now, but I would appreciate seeing something come from the council in the immediate future. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam City Clerk, are there any other public comments?
Yes, Madam Mayor. Thank you. We have Jesse. Please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I mainly wanted to call about the bike lane on Patrick, but I also want to echo Alicia's statement regarding the official city email being using for campaign purposes. It just does not seem like a good thing that we want to encourage. It seems like something we want to discourage in the future. But regarding Patrick, so I live on Schaefer, and I drive down Patrick almost every day. Less since COVID, since I'm staying home more often. But I'm also riding my bike more frequently too, which would take me down the same way. And I definitely agree we do need bike lanes there. I think that an issue we're having with people parking in the bike lane right now can be addressed either through, having someone from the city come down and just put like friendly reminders on the cars saying, hey, just letting you know, this is the bike lane. You got to move your car to another spot. I also think that drivers would be more inclined to park where they're supposed to if there was like a built up or raised curb in that barrier in between the bike lane and the parking area. Right now, there's just white lines, and I'm not sure people understand what they're supposed to do. Because it is new and it takes some adjusting. So just some ideas on things we could do. And I also know that there is the church across from Weeks Park, which gives out food periodically. And when you get a long line of cars there, if they weren't parked, lined up in that parking right now, they would be 100% blocking traffic. So and it's kind of like traffic is a little bit better at that time of day simply because people are parking in the bike lane. And I want to make sure we have a way of addressing that in the future. But I don't know a solution for it. Thank you very much for hearing my calls or my comments.
All right, thank you for your comments.
Thank you. Mayor Halliday, that was the last speaker under public comments.
All right, thank you. Then I'll close public comments.
Sorry, I have a public comment as well.
Councilmember Mendel.
Thank you, Mayor. So I do want to just acknowledge the meeting that did take place on Sunday in Weeks Park to talk about the Patrick Ave changes. Councilmember Salinas and Marquez are both there as well to listen. And I thank, Bill, Patrick, and Alex, Rafaela, Linda, and the 25 other folks who came out to talk. I think we had a really good discussion. There were some good suggestions made. I hope I was able to provide some context, as to the goals of the changes and, let them know that it's not quite done yet. There are bollards coming that will really help to clarify how the road is supposed to work. There'll be obviously some gentle enforcement that's going to need to take place, to get people to use it correctly and instruct them. And I really encourage everyone to give it some time to see how it actually works once it's done and complete and set up the way that it is intended. And folks were generally accepting of that. They weren't, I don't want to say they were all in favor of it, but understanding that, we need to actually see how it works when it's done. I think there was general agreement to that. And I did commit the city, and I hope I wasn't overstepping here, commit the city to have some follow-up meetings, especially in some number of months in the future. I kept using 6 months, but something in that time range. Once people have had a chance to see it done, see how it works, and to really sort of come back together and evaluate how it's going and whether there are some tweaks and things that are needed. I did commit the city to that, and since I won't be on the council in 6 months, I wanted to at least pass that on. I put all this in writing to staff, a quick summary of the meeting and this as well, so that's there in writing. And then the other suggestion I would make is that there were some really intelligent and thoughtful tweaks that were recommended. Patrick, mentioned one on his particular corner. And there were a number of others, a stop sign here, a loading zone there, some signage there that could help to make the new setup work better. And I asked everyone there to sort of resend those to me, and I'll be forwarding them to staff. And I know staff is committed to reviewing them all. And I hope that those are things that we might be able to implement sooner than the 6-month time period to give that change the best chance it has to work as best as it possibly can. So I'm just passing that along to everyone so the entire council is aware. Like I said, it was a good meeting, but some follow-up is needed to sort of review this in the future. So my opinion, and you guys can follow up as you see fit. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you for holding that meeting. And I hope that staff is listening. And I think all of us would back up, even if you're not going to be around, that we do continue to monitor this and perhaps make some adjustments. Okay, Councilmember Wahab.
Thank you, Mayor. I do appreciate all the individuals that have also emailed in regards to Patrick Avenue. I think that this was a big concern to a wide variety of people living in that area. I also I reviewed the staff report again after we had the meeting, as more and more people have reached out to us. I asked our city manager if she could provide some clarity and some data in regards to our public safety personnel on emergency calls. They often use that particular street to kind of move through the city a lot faster. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. All of our streets are designed using what's called a standard detail, which has been vetted so that the lane width will accommodate emergency vehicles. In addition, in private developments where private streets are being developed, our public safety, we do have the fire department and police department review those plans as they're being developed, and they make sure that there's enough turnaround if there's a dead end in a new subdivision or a new townhouse development, that there's enough turnaround space for fire engines. They look at the access in terms of water, and then all of our public streets, the new public streets, are designed with appropriate lane width for particularly fire engines and fire trucks.
Okay, so the reason why I bring that up is because many people have asked regarding the public safety, if there is an emergency, it being moved into a single lane and so forth, how that will work, including our own public safety individuals. So if we can just make those announcements that, we have vetted this, and in future staff reports, if we can clearly talk about the public safety aspect of changing some of these street lanes as well. I know our director of public works is very clear and concise in his staff reports, but this was the one piece that I did not find any information to share with others. So if we can have that in future staff reports, just the public safety piece.
Sure, and I know he's listening on the meeting tonight, so
Right. Thank you.
Comment as well.
Okay, thank you for that. And with that, seeing no other council members or anyone wanting to make a further public comment, we'll move on to our action items this evening. And that brings us to our consent calendar, which this evening is items 1 through 8. And I have requests to pull off items 4 and 5. Is there anyone who wants to pull any other items off? Councilmember Wahab? Oh, did you just?
No, the 4 and 5 is, the ones I want to pull.
Okay. And Councilmember Mendel also wanted to pull 5. And Madam City Clerk, do we have any members of the public who want to speak on any of the consent items?
Yes, Madam Mayor. Going to the attendees, and I don't see anyone raising their hand. So I'm assuming no one wants to speak on items 1 through 8, which is the consent calendar.
Okay, then I will now entertain a motion from council on items 1, 2, 3, and 6, 7, and 8.
So moved, Mayor.
Moved by Councilmember Marquez. Is there a second?
Second, by Councilmember Mendel, and with the clarification that the item 2 includes that one sentence or one paragraph revision that the city clerk submitted in advance.
All right. You both, okay, Councilmember Wahab, you didn't want to comment on that, did you? Okay, so it's been moved by Councilmember Marquez, seconded by Councilmember Mendel to approve items 1 through 3 and 6 through 8. Madam City Clerk, will you do a roll call vote?
Yes, Madam Mayor. Happy to do that. Councilmember Lamnin.
Aye.
Councilmember Marquez.
Aye.
Councilmember Mendel.
Yes.
Councilmember Salinas.
Yes.
Councilmember Wahab.
Yes.
Councilmember Cermeño.
Yes.
Mayor Halliday.
Yes. And the
Thank you.
motion passes with 7 aye votes, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, now we'll go back to item number 4, which is adoption of a resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with CalPERS via the California Employers Pension Pre-Funding Trust, which is a Section 115 irrevocable trust, and delegating authority to request disbursements. Councilmember Wahab.
Thank you, Mayor. Just some simple questions. Primarily, one, if our Director of Finance can clearly just explain what this is to the larger public.
Sure, I'll do my best here to sort of simplify it and put it in plain English the best that I can. So what this is a trust that will be set up that the city can put funds into. It's not a requirement that the city put funds into, and we can open it without an initial deposit. But once we put funds in there, the funds have to be used to pay the city, be used towards paying the city's unfunded liabilities for the pension. So essentially, we'll put money in there. We can draw down on it at any time to pay for the city's pension cost. The biggest benefit in my mind is that as we sort of sock away money into the fund, eventually, if we were to hit a place like we did with the COVID-19 pandemic, in which we had such a budget shortfall over that time, we could draw down on those funds and essentially borrow from ourselves while still getting a great return on the funds, and really help to sort of make the challenge in balancing the budget in such a difficult time much easier. So.
Okay, and then do we have a rough estimate of how much we would get in return?
Yeah, they estimate it's approximately 7%. That's for a long-term, a long-term commitment. Looking at the investment and on a longer term, not sort of day trading, if you will, and allowing the funds to be in there. It's set up so that it has a longer term in the maturity life of the investments than say the city's portfolio. So they're able to achieve a larger return.
And what does this long term mean? Like roughly how much? How long?
It fluctuates, and there's nothing that says the city has to stay in for a period of time with those funds, but they manage it with, I think, an average maturity between the 10 and 15 year range. But they've certainly got funds that that can be liquidated at any point.
Okay, and then it wasn't clearly stated, but which of the two diversified asset allocation strategy is selected for this particular fund that we option 1 or option 2?
We haven't selected yet, and it's not required that we do. My inkling is to go with the one that allows the best return on investment. I don't think the city's going to put I should say, withdraw small amounts from this fund. So I think as we put funds in, they'll sit, and the longer they sit, the better they'll do, the more that will be in there, and the more we'll have at our disposal when we choose to access it and help to pay down the city's pension liability.
So are we looking at the more volatile option 1?
Haven't made that determination just yet. It's certainly something that we'll consider on both. You know me, I am conservative by nature. So certainly return is something that we consider, but also maintenance of principle is top priority.
Okay, and the reason why I bring that up is because it's either greater risk, greater reward, and
Sure.
that whole saying, right? And for the most part, do we have anything in place that we will be putting any funds into anything right now?
We have not programmed any funds towards this just yet. My suggestion would be that as we, we establish the use of one-time funds policy and the reserve policy, I believe in the fiscal year 19 budget. And so we can go back to that. And as one-time funds come in, we'll certainly be, I'll be making consideration and recommendations to the council, likely either to this trust or, into OPEB, obviously.
Okay. I do appreciate your answers and your responses. It makes it very clear. I'll move the item.
Is there a second?
Yes, Councilmember Mendel seconds.
Okay, thank you. Are there any, Councilmember Mendel, do you want to?
Well, I was going to move it, but I'll just say thank you to the Budget Committee, Mayor Halliday, Councilmember Wahab, Councilmember Landon for the work on setting this up, and to staff. I think it's a good vehicle for us to set up, and if we ever have one-time funds that we can, set aside, we've got the place to put it. And when we do that, that would be the logical time to decide which of the investment options to choose, because then we'll have a better sense of what our time horizon is. Is this a 2 or 3 year set aside, or is it a longer term investment? In which case we could choose a more volatile option if we know we're going to leave it there for a while. So, thank you.
And I just want to clarify with Mr. Clausen that the funds in this fund, because it is an irrevocable trust and the funds cannot be used for anything other than our pension liabilities, the money in there will count toward our total funded status, right?
That is correct. Even though it won't be in the city's plan, it will be assets that offset the liability that's out there.
Okay. All right. Are there any other questions or comments from council before we vote? Seeing none, I'll ask our city clerk, Madam City Clerk, to please do a roll call vote on the motion that was made by Council Member Wahab and seconded by Council Member Mendel.
Yes, Madam Mayor. Thank you. Councilmember Lamnin.
Aye.
Councilmember Marquez.
Aye.
Councilmember Mendel.
Yes.
Councilmember Salinas.
Yes.
Councilmember Wahab.
Yes.
Councilmember Cermeño.
Yes.
Mayor Halliday.
Yes. The motion carries with 7 aye votes, correct?
Correct. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to item number 5, which is adoption of a resolution authorizing the city manager to submit an application to the California State Department of Housing and Community Development for a maximum amount of $5 million for mortgage assistance funding under the Cal Home program, and to enter into an agreement and any subsequent amendments, et cetera, and accept and appropriate any funds that are awarded through this grant application in an amount not to exceed $5 million. And let's see, Councilmember Mendel, you had asked, and also Councilmember Wahab, but Councilmember Mendel, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So I'd asked to pull this item because I'm opposed to it. Basically, we've had conversations in the past about how to use our affordable housing dollars. And, there was a discussion at that time, I want to say it's in the last 2 years, about, first-time homebuyer assistance programs. And I know I spoke very forcefully against that option because I don't think that those programs tend to work very well in the kind of economic environment that we have now. If we had a lot of vacant homes and people couldn't afford to buy them, then a first-time homebuyer assistance program would make a lot of sense, right? If we had more supply than demand, it would make sense. But in an environment where we have far more supply, far more people trying to buy a home than there are homes available, offering cash to people who are buying it doesn't really increase home ownership. It's solving a problem. It's not solving the right problem, in my opinion. So I would much rather apply for this grant money and use it to, increase supply or to help maintain existing supply. Any of the other, 5 options that are available would be a much wiser use of the funds than this use. And so I will not be supporting this motion. I will not be supporting this item if somebody moves it.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Wahab, you also asked to have this item pulled.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. So particularly, is Director Ott on the line by any chance?
Yes, and I'm here with the housing manager, Christina Morales, as well.
Perfect. Thank you. Director Ott, would you be able to just clearly just give a high-level overview of this particular item?
Yes, sure. I mean, I think one of the reasons we are recommending this is because of the conversations we've had at the Homelessness and Housing Task Force. There was a lot of desire at the task force level to study ways that we could promote affordable home ownership in the city. And so we came with a pretty comprehensive report on, I believe, June 2nd or 4th. And one of the big issues there is that we don't have funds that the city has available to really support creating a whole new program like this. And this particular source of funds is really, in our view, one of probably the only funds available. It's outside the city. So if we don't want to use our funds and allocate our funds, and we can't use our developer fees for this for affordable housing, this is one of our best opportunities if we're going to do an affordable home ownership program, is to use these state funds to do that. They pay for staff administration as well, so we get our staff costs covered. Housing Manager Morales is worked on this similar types of programs for the city of Oakland for 13 years, has a lot of experience, and so can do it very efficiently and can manage it efficiently. So I think we did study the other alternatives, and we don't think that those are viable options right now. None of them really focus on supply very well. I mean, one of them is for potentially encouraging development of accessory dwelling units. There was a lot of work that was done a couple of years ago where we don't think there's a lot of interest in that. The other is home ownership development projects, and we would have to have an actual project to apply for. The only one that we have right now in the city that's kind of viable, already applied for those funds, but because of environmental and unforeseen conditions, actually lost those funds because of delays outside of their control. And so we don't have a project really that we can fund. So we don't think these funds can be really used to significantly increase supply as an alternative, but it is a way that we think we can provide some stability for our lower income residents to achieve some home ownership. And it could also be used to help homeowners who are trying to get into inclusionary units, like the Sohei units, so that actually could help even lower income, in inclusionary units, not just market rate units. I don't know if Housing Manager Morales wants to jump in. Is there anything more you'd like to add to that?
No, I think you covered it. Thanks.
Also, in addition to that question, overall, what are the types of projects that can be covered with this particular item?
Councilmember Wahab, we lost your voice.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Did you hear the whole question, or should I just repeat it?
No, about the first half of it, so I think you should repeat it.
But overall, I just wanted to say, what types of programs would this particular item cover? You're on mute, yeah.
Do you mean the program that we're recommending applying for? No. The mortgage assistance program, or are you talking about what alternatives we could use the funds for?
There's alternatives as well, which would be open to us, correct?
Yes, that are eligible uses. Christina can jump in here as well, but I think there's a residential rehabilitation program. We actually already have a program in the city that's funded through CDBG funding. It's very labor intensive from a staff standpoint, and we don't have the staff right now to kind of to scale that program up at this point. There's the affordable homeownership developments. We're actually teaming with like a Habitat for Humanity that actually has a project that they're building. Christina, the ADUs already mentioned funding the development of deed restricted affordable units or ADUs. Christina, you want to jump in as well?
Yeah, and then there's 2 technical assistance programs, which we don't have the experience in administering. So with the short notice for the NOFA, we really wouldn't be able to be competitive for applying for those funds.
Definitely, no, I appreciate that. So I particularly just want to state that home ownership is definitely a priority, at least for me. I also want to say that speaking to some of the real estate agents and basically the real estate group, if you will, many of them have also suggested that we don't have enough to let's say bolster home ownership. And I personally believe that home or housing as a whole is a multi-pronged effort. So I understand some of the concerns and reservations. You know, we can't help everything that we want and do everything we want with one particular item. So I do believe that this hits a couple of the points that we would either miss out on or unable to fully direct just based on a lack of resources. So I really do appreciate the work that staff did, the creativity on this. I do want to ask, do we have anything in regards to the affordability options when selling?
So we can only do a deferred loan term. There are two types within that loan term. One would be a deferred payment loan with accruing interest. Interest would be anywhere from 0 to 3%. The other option is to do a shared appreciation loan.
Okay. And then have we talked about any other options, you know, talking to the Community Land Trust, anything else that we can fit under this umbrella?
We definitely could partner. We could combine these funds with any other home ownership project that came online during this. The grant period is 3 years. So during this 3-year period, if the land trust came up with a proposal and we're bringing new ownership units online, we would be able to combine this program with those new units or with any units that were developed under the inclusionary housing ordinance.
Perfect. And again, I do appreciate this. This is not, you know, the most perfect item, but it covers a lot of the things that we would miss out on some other, you know, focuses that we want to do around housing. So I really do appreciate staff's effort of hitting every single tier that we can. I will move the item.
Is there a second?
Mayor, I have a question.
Yeah, okay. Actually, Councilmember Lambden is next, but Councilmember Wahab has made a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, and go ahead, Councilmember Lambden.
Okay. Is that okay? Councilmember Marquez?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor. So thank you for bringing this forward, and I appreciate the question about the land trust, Councilmember Wahab. And Councilmember Mendel, I recall the very eloquent way that former Councilmember Jones talked about the non-competitiveness of buyers with these kinds of having to piece together housing. What we've heard in the last few years, though, is that the way the market has shifted, there's actually more opportunity, that there's a need for this program again. I don't think there's enough. So I appreciate that our city staff's eagle eye on keeping an eye out for this and leveraging this opportunity to do that, because I think the other thing that it does is the thing that I know I've said, and I believe others have said as well, is, you know, as we are looking at a looming recession, we need to position ourselves well to be able to capture properties, to be able to transition them into ownership, to be able to prevent displacement as much as possible. And I think having this tool in our toolbox, especially funded from outside funds, allows us to do that. And yes, to the extent that these mortgages can be shared equity, can be deed restricted affordable upon sale, those are important components to me, as much as is legally possible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Marquez, sorry.
That's okay. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you to staff for the comprehensive report. I just had a couple questions. So this is just a request for funding, correct? There's no guarantee that we will get it. This is just submitting, competing for the state dollars. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and if we are awarded the grant, would a resident be able to take advantage of these state fundings in addition to A1 housing bond funding through the county?
I would have to verify that I believe A1 is allowing the two different product types to be combined with other deferred mortgages, but I'd have to look into that.
Okay, so if we could get that information at a later date. And also, this is aligned with our strategic roadmap with regard to protecting and preserving and creating affordable housing. So I'm happy to support the motion, and thank you to the committee and staff for your good work.
Thank you. Are there any other council members who wish to comment right now. I also just checked the attendees. I don't see any members of the public wanting to talk on this item, correct, Madam City Clerk?
That's correct, Mayor Halliday.
I'll just comment that I'll be supporting this motion as well. And I think there's another thing that occurred to me as I was reviewing it, and that is that we're talking a lot about equity these days and about the wealth gap that exists in our community, in our state, in our country. And I think while it is a small contribution, I mean, we're not going to obviously be funding dozens of loans, but it is a way for us to help start, adjusting that. The wealth gap has a lot to do with housing policies of the past that were horrendously racist, and so I saw that, especially at this time when we're talking a lot about those issues, that spoke to me. And I was around during the time that we had the other first-time home buyer program. Former council member Olden Henson was especially involved in that, as I recall. It's pretty impressive that we did, keep it in existence for 17 years, it looks like, and made 257 loans. That, we don't appear to have had any. We do have 42 that are still outstanding and continue to be serviced, but I don't think that we've had any kinds of problems with that program. Is that correct, staff? As far as you know?
There have been. Oh, go ahead, Christina.
I think there have been some foreclosures. We haven't seen a full tally of the foreclosures. We're still trying to do the research on those different loans. Okay. But I think the majority of them have been paid off over time or are still currently paying.
All right. So with that, I will ask our city clerk to call the roll for the vote on the motion that was made by Councilmember Wahab and seconded by Councilmember Lamnin.
Yes, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Lamnin.
Aye.
Councilmember Marquez.
Aye.
Councilmember Mendel.
No.
Councilmember Salinas.
Yes.
Councilmember Wahab.
Yes.
Councilmember Cermeño.
Yes.
Mayor Halliday.
Yes.
Thank you.
Motion passes with 6 aye votes and 1 no vote.
That's correct. Thank you.
Okay. So with that, we could do the others. Okay. So with that, we're now going to move on to our work session item. And we're going to hear about COVID-19 trends and impacts on the real estate market. I believe, both commercial and to some extent housing. So I'm going to now turn this over. I believe, is it directly to Deputy City Manager Ott? Are you starting us off, or is it?
I think Director Simpson is going to start us off.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Halliday and members of council. Over the past 8 months, we've seen our national, state, and local economies dramatically impacted by the results of the COVID-19 pandemic, raising many questions about what the future holds for new development in Hayward, the Bay Area, and beyond. How will changes in certain market sectors affect developments either approved or under review in our project pipeline? So development services and economic development staff thought it would be helpful to both staff and the council to bring together some of the Bay Area's real estate experts to provide their perspective on the future of the industrial, office, hotel, retail, and multifamily development in Hayward specifically, and the impacts of COVID. Paul Nguyen, our economic development manager, has been instrumental in assembling our 4 distinguished panelists. Staff is requesting that questions from council members please be held until the end after each panelist provides a 5 to 7 minute overview of their particular market area. Then questions may be directed to any panelist. So I will now turn it over to Paul Nguyen to introduce our panelists for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Paul Nguyen, Economic Development team member here. Pleased to be here tonight. There's a tremendous amount of information we're going to go through really quickly, so I'll get right to it. First up, it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Jason Avadia from JLL, who will discuss industrial real estate trends. Jason is the Managing Director of Industrial and Logistics with JLL, where he leads the Northern California practice. He's a very active industrial real estate broker representing JLL's most prestigious clients. Since 2008, he has been involved in over $2 billion worth of real estate transactions, completing over 40 million square feet of leasing and sales. Jason also serves as the co-chair of JLL's Industrial Executive Committee and is also a board member of the National Association of Industrial Office and Properties chapter in San Francisco. Jason, thank you for being here tonight. I'll turn it over.
Thank you, Paul. Hopefully everyone can see and hear me. You ate up all my time with reading my resume there. Thank you for that.
Cheers.
So we can go to the next slide, and I can jump right in. Appreciate the introduction, Paul. Very kind. So this first slide here is national in nature, and this is something that our national JLL logistics team, along with my partner, who's actually on this call as well, Ada Wong, ran for a Fortune 500 company that specializes in pharmaceutical and medical device distribution. Starting around March 19th, Ada and I were hired by our client to run a site selection search for ultimately what ended up being the procurement of the contract with the White House to run the COVID-19 response vaccination program. When we first started out, this search encompassed the entire United States, ultimately ended up being 2.9 million square feet throughout the greater Midwest. And that was not by accident. This was based on essentially inventory that was available to accommodate these operations. It took about 6 months and encompassed 3 different requirements: the personal protective equipment, the PPE, the vaccine storage and distribution when we get one, and the syringe and distribution of the actual kitting. The reason for me showing you this slide is, aside from the fact that it kept me up pretty much 23 hours a day for the last 6 months, the unique thing here was that in all these markets that we surveyed, which was about 15 nationally, and where we ended up in these 4 different markets, we had a tremendous amount of competition, and the lack of inventory and for industrial in these markets was staggering. And everywhere that we went, we were one of 2 very large, e-commerce companies competing for space. So not unique to the Bay Area in terms of demand. Again, nationally, what we're seeing here is about 65% of the demand for corporate occupiers encompasses five major components of industrial. E-commerce is by far the biggest, which encompasses about 36% of the 65. And then everything else is more or less related to, goods related movement, whether that's done online and through e-commerce or not, is really irrelevant. But what we're seeing is logistics and parcel delivery. So the FedExes, the UPSs, DHL and United States Postal Services. We're seeing a ton of home improvement companies that such as IKEA, Home Depot, Target. And then, obviously food and beverage has been extraordinarily robust, along with consumer products. Let's go to the next slide. So this is the immediate impact that COVID had on the industrial market in the overall Bay Area, which I'm calling Richmond to the north, Fremont to the south, Livermore to the east. So greater Port of Oakland market. So starting in March, we tracked about 4.15 million square feet of deals that went immediately on hold due to shelter in place. The greatest impact that we saw was unfortunately on the smaller non-corporate occupiers. and we saw rents in that 20,000 square foot space and smaller dip slightly. Also, we picked up a lot more sublease vacancy. Obviously, this is due to the fact that a lot of these smaller businesses put their buildings on the market for sublease. And then ultimately, of the 4.1 million square feet that died due to COVID, about 2 million, so half, went on hold, which is technically is a good thing because these tenants are starting to come back to the market now. Next slide. So this is quite frankly the reason why I showed the first slide is the Bay Area is not unique in terms of our industrial demand and supply. So here in the Bay Area, this is the lowest point since we started building Class A new distribution facilities back in 2014. This is the lowest point in time in our development cycle. So we have the least amount in our pipeline throughout the East Bay. More than ever before. So what's staggering here is we've got about 5.4 million square feet of total inventory throughout the East Bay for industrial and a demand of about 5.7 million square feet. So demand outweighs supply. We had a great third quarter, historical high absorption of about 500,000 square feet, which is very, very good. Our average rents are about 92 cents a foot, triple net per month. Not really much of a dip due to COVID, but what we've seen is more free rent and more tenant improvement allowance concessions. In Hayward, we experienced a little bit of negative absorption, but our vacancy rate is very healthy here at 6.3%. And as of right now, there are no new projects in the pipeline for new development. So 6.3% vacancy with 27.5 million square feet of inventory is pretty good. That's pretty healthy. What makes up most of the demand here in the overall Bay Area again is more e-commerce, which is extraordinarily robust. That makes up about 3.1 million square feet of tenants in the market in the Bay Area, which is 60% overall. We still are seeing some pretty spotty but steady demand from manufacturing. Obviously, not as much as there was maybe 18 or 24 months ago. But as we sit today, demand remains relatively focused in the Fremont and Newark and Milpitas markets. We're starting to see some of that migrate up, north on the 880 corridor. And then, lastly, due to COVID, we've seen, obviously an uptick in biotech and life science demand. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a representative of life science in Hayward and also the entire Bay Area, not just the East Bay. So due to our ability to go back in time only so far, we went back to about 2008. And we've so far tracked about 26 life science companies for 500,000 square feet in Hayward proper. And you can see from the illustration on the left, they're mostly densely populated right around the 92, and that's not by accident. That's an easier place to pull labor from the South Bay. And then if you look at the slide on the right, you can see where most of the demand for life science, at least going back a year, has been mostly clustered in Emeryville, Berkeley, and South San Francisco mid-peninsula. So 74% of all of our leasing activity for life science is made up of the two of those four cities. So about 3.1 million square feet. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a study that JLL has done. I believe Paul may have seen it, one iteration of it before, but we call it the Momentum Index. And what this does is we ranked 64 Bay Area cities based on their demographics and the amount of industrial real estate they have in their cities. And so the middle area here represents a very balanced type city that has demographics and industrial supply that more or less align to support what we're calling here on this slide advanced industries, which could be otherwise categorized as advanced manufacturing. And so I showed this chart just to be representative of where Fremont sits as a very, very balanced city. And Hayward, towards the left side here, shows that it's slightly out of balance, meaning that we just have a little bit more supply for industrial than we do have labor with the proper training and degrees to work in those types of facilities. So further to the left, more out of balance. Further to the right, again, out of balance. You want to be right in the middle. So the next slide, here shows manufacturing, warehouse distribution, and logistics operations, and the scale being balanced here. So you can see Hayward is more balanced, and I'm picking on Fremont here, but Hayward is more balanced than Fremont, and you see it's closer to being fully balanced because there is that good weight of industrial supply and industrial labor. Next slide here. Okay, so this is a really hot topic here in the world that I live in, which is mostly warehouse distribution and manufacturing. And where I think this makes sense right now today is we've seen the demand for e-commerce probably accelerate about 10 years due to COVID. So everyone's clicking and buying from home, and they're getting very, very used to having everything delivered to them. And if my 75-year-old mother can do it, there's no excuse. So what we see here is what is a negative on e-commerce? Infrastructure degradation, obviously due to more fleet on the road, huge environmental impact concerns from emission, and then obviously the point of sale with sales tax revenue not being very robust for e-commerce. So these are all things that in our opinion can and will be fixed. So my next slide illustrates Hayward as being a city that meets a lot of the criteria that an e-commerce company would target in terms of wanting to have a location here. And it's because the population and the median household income really align well for their demographics, for their customers. And so Hayward, I'm going to show you here on the next slide. Okay, so this is an illustration that shows Hayward versus a couple of other East Bay surrounding cities. And so what we're showing here on the left is an e-commerce facility being located somewhere in Hayward. We're doing this all by zip codes, totally random. So by being located in Hayward and servicing their customers who are actually living in your city, there's huge operational savings. So we compared it to San Leandro, and basically this would mean if they're located in San Leandro and they're delivering packages to your residents in Hayward, it will cost $1 million more roughly in operations to be in San Leandro. If you go further out to Fremont, we're talking about $2.9 million. From Oakland, it's a staggering $5.1 million. So you can see why there's so much demand from an e-commerce occupier to bring packages to their consumers, their customers, and your residents by being in Hayward. So that is the reason. And in closing, we think, go back to Ada, go back to the slide 11, please, with the sustainability. Yeah. So we think because of that, there obviously there would be infrastructure degradation anyways if the e-commerce companies are located in a neighboring city and still using your roadways and streets by servicing your residents. So we think that that's probably something that would happen anyways. We're noticing now not just the big behemoth e-commerce company, but all parcel delivery companies are making a concerted effort to lessen their carbon footprint. And whether that's investing in emissionless vehicles and that technology, or making plans to change their future fleet, rest assured, I'm involved in multiple different projects where we're seeing major corporate occupiers make a huge effort to lessen their carbon footprint. And then point of sale loss of tax revenue. We think that because of the savings operationally by locating in your city to deliver to your residents would create such a windfall for these occupiers that there may be a way to offset some of that lost sales tax revenue through things like TIFs, traffic impact, to help lessen the stress or infrastructure degradation these fleets put on the roads. So that's what we're seeing right now in terms of national and local demand. And in closing, I'd just like to say that this year has been extraordinarily difficult for everybody. What we've seen in the commercial real estate industry has been second to none at any point in time. And from an industrial standpoint, we never went home. And all of these companies are growing very, very rapidly, and they're running out of space, not just in the Bay Area, but everywhere in the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate you taking the time. Moving right along, happy to introduce Mr. David Greensfelder. David is the founder and managing partner of Greensfelder Real Estate Strategy, which provides strategic planning, market research, and real estate development services to communities, financial institutions, and investors. As a developer consultant and corporate real estate executive, he has driven more than 350 projects spanning 7 million square feet with an aggregate acquisition and construction value exceeding $1.25 billion. David is active and well-known in the real estate world. He recently prepared the City of San Jose's downtown retail strategy, and he currently serves on the board for the Center of Creative Land Recycling and the ICSC P3 National Steering Committee. Welcome, David.
Hi, it's nice to be here. And are you going to flip slides?
No. I can if you need.
Would you please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Let's see here. Let's see. There we go.
I seem to be having an obstinate connection on my end. So, and we can go to the next slide, and then, so great. So, I want to start by talking about resilience, which is really the ability to plan for, absorb, and adapt to adverse events. And that, of course, is the topic for this evening. So next slide, please. We've prepared a methodology that we call retail resilience, which really guides retail and economic development, helping to create an understanding of local aspirations, emphasizing accessibility to a range of shopping options. Next slide, please. I think that in addition to being a triple bottom line, it's important to be what is commonly referred to as quadruple bottom line, which means that in addition to social, environmental, and economic performance, we're also purpose-driven, which means that we're looking into the future. Next slide, please. So as part of methodology for looking at retail, we think it's important to understand local concerns, strengths and opportunities, evaluate planning tools, to have whatever we're doing being data-driven, and to take advantage of innovation and technology. And I'm going to go into these points specifically. So if we could slip forward to 2 slides. Thank you. So for purposes of tonight's conversation, I want to differentiate between commodity and specialty retail goods and services. Commodity retail are items where the primary motivation and purchasing function is a trade-off between price and convenience. So imagine a cell phone, and imagine the days when we might have been on a business trip. You drop it in a puddle, you've got to have one right now. Price really isn't the object. You've got to have it right now, as opposed to doing an upgrade when you might be willing to wait or wait for a number of days for delivery. So in other words, trade-off between price and convenience. Next slide. Specialty retail, on the other hand, is discretionary purchases where we're using discretionary funds that are not earmarked for rent or commuting or food, and our discretionary time, the time that we're not spending taking care of the exigencies of life or working. So a sense of place becomes an important component of specialty retail purchases. Next slide. So when retailers, in COVID, retailers are having a hard time operating, and consumers similarly are having a difficult time. Cities also having a difficult time looking at reductions in sales tax revenue, and then as we begin to look out further, property tax revenue, I'm sure we're anticipating are going to be going down or at least going to be contested. At the same time, from a retail resilience approach, we really need to acknowledge inequities, and that's for residents and businesses alike in terms of their operations, and then also procuring goods. It's important to be thinking about equity issues, both from the consumer and from the retailer's perspective. But in looking for solutions, we want to be looking at co-benefits. So how can we find solutions that end up benefiting more than one group at the same time? Next slide. We also need to balance prioritizing immediate needs in favor of longer-term goals and initiatives. And longer-term strategies are going to include attracting new businesses to inevitably empty spaces and identifying community assets that can be harnessed, and again, looking to co-benefits. Next slide. As we mentioned earlier, general funds are closely tied to sales and property tax revenues, and this is going to have an impact in the intermediate and the longer term. I think we're in the intermediate term now. The immediate was right when COVID happened last spring, and now we're in this mode of things opening, closing, and we're adjusting on a daily basis, but we're not in the immediate shock. Retailers, projects, and districts that are going to be resilient and flourish, are going to have to employ some of these resilience strategies, and some are also going to fall by the wayside inevitably. And so we need to be ready for the inevitable retail footprint contraction. Furthermore, in the intermediate term, we also need to be thinking heavily about how we're going to be balancing public health with economic activity. Next slide. Tenants and landlords are both trying to figure out how to stay in business. They're trying to minimize their fixed expenses and match revenues with variable expenses. So we want to emphasize understanding vulnerabilities and identifying opportunities and systemic barriers to both retailers and landlords being able to make progress moving forward. Next slide. We're grossly over-retailed in the United States. Everybody is aware that retail has been contracting. And if you look at this chart, which is now a couple of years old, you can see just how much more retail we have in the US on a per capita basis than other countries. Canada, the next closest, having a third less, and Europe and Asia often having just a fraction, 10 to 20% what we have. Next slide, please. So the new equilibrium really is talking about taking retail space that's no longer needed. And the rate at which that space is no longer needed has accelerated vastly with COVID, and allowing that space to be repurposed for other uses. The uses that go into that other space, whether it's office or housing, for example, represents demand for retail goods and services. So the idea of this iterative new equilibrium is really that we allow retail that doesn't have a reason to exist anymore to fall by the wayside, be repurposed to another use that then represents demand for the retail that still exists. Next slide. We want to think about consumer behaviors in terms of commodity versus specialty. Commodity shopping behaviors are much different from specialty goods and services shopping behaviors. A lot of emphasis has been placed on commodities, particularly during COVID, and particularly obtaining commodities through non-bricks and mortar channels. And commodities lend themselves much more clearly to these alternative channels, such as online shopping. Specialty goods and services have tended to be way down since COVID. And the recovery for both malls and high streets and downtown districts are really going to be a function of how long it takes us to feel comfortable being out with strangers again. So the expectation should be that commodities will continue to perform relatively better than specialty goods and services. Next slide, please. We also need to focus on enabling strategies for retailers to flourish, at least as much as is possible. These include buy online, pick up in store, where you order something online, you go and you pick it up, and that might include a drive-by pickup. It also includes harnessing existing influencer networks to try to get local communities to shop in our local shopping districts. And that also implies having local platforms up to date, Google, Yelp, have current information up to date on those platforms so that retailers can make themselves known to consumers, and similarly consumers can find the retailers. Let's go forward 2 slides. There needs to be an expectation that we're going to be taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. We're already seeing other parts of the country that are beginning to shut down again with the 3rd wave. Now, chain retailers have greater resources at their disposals than independent retailers, but, and I think this is an extremely important point, my expectation is that local and independent retailers who know their customers better, have their ear to the ground, and are not run by large bureaucracies, are going to be able to adjust faster and outperform chains in many instances because they have the ability to adjust to local concerns and tastes and demands more quickly and more fluidly. And that when we return to long-term trends, and we will, I mean, we did after the oil embargo in 1973. We started flying again after 9/11. I mean, we are going to eventually be out shopping again. I think you're going to see a lot of tried and true brands that have fallen by the wayside and failed to adapt. And you're going to see some independents who are going to be touted as the leaders coming out of COVID because they were able to adapt. They were able to figure it out. Next slide. So again, retail is demand driven, and open air projects are going to, for obvious reasons, be favored over enclosed malls. In California, that puts us in an advantage compared to some other parts of the country. Strong retailers are no doubt going to use this time as an opportunity to reposition, and we're already seeing that. As excess space comes on the market, as chains in particular begin to fall by the wayside. And again, independent retail is having an opportunity to shine as they're able to, because of lower rents, landlords trying to fill spaces, perhaps upgrade their location. Next slide. We need to rethink businesses, and that's going to include digital adoption and understanding what can be done in non-traditional ways. Next slide. So this is going to include integrating digital to augment in-person experiences. We've already begun to see that. Next slide. And defining what a safe experience looks like. And this is a very important place for cities and for economic development. It's communication. It's communication among cities and retailers and landlords, but it's also communication about what expectations should be. Next slide. And that different workplaces have different risks. Now, I'm giving you a huge amount of written information, and I'm going very quickly through this because of time limitations. I'm happy to answer questions and also to answer questions after this, this council meeting is over, if there are some. Next slide. You can see that there's an expectation that it's going to take a long time to return to normal. The consumers are going to be hesitant to return to normal activities. There's going to be some collective PTSD from COVID that it's going to take a long time to overcome. And, you know, alternative dining arrangements, for example, utilization of outdoor and public spaces, that's going to be very important here in the intermediate term. But I also think it's going to be important after we have a vaccine in place and we can begin to start thinking about returning to a more, you know, quote, normal experience. Let's go forward 2 slides to the supporting retail slide. I want to give you an example of technology. Booking platforms like OpenTable were generally used to make restaurant reservations, but we've seen these existing platforms used to meter the number of people that are going into other non-food and beverage retail locations. There is a nursery, for example, near where I live in Berkeley that's been using this platform to arrange when people are actually going to be able to come and then what their window is to be shopping in the nursery. So there are existing technologies that are out there, and then there are new technologies. You might want to check out truelocal.com, which is just opening up in Indianapolis and Tucson, trying to match local retail venues with local consumers. Next slide. We want to make sure also the common areas are ready for occupancy. And this is another place where economic development professionals can really lend a hand in terms of communicating the hierarchy of controls, but also best practices. Next slide. You know, back to the platform, you know, the OpenTable and uses of platforms for using platforms for uses for which they were not originally intended, that we want to be looking for opportunities that go beyond just digital lipstick and to promote and adopt thinking and technology at a larger scale. Now, if you go forward to the retail and mixed use development slide on page 32, I actually get to go past 7 minutes because I was asked to do 2 presentations, and I'm going to give you a lightning fast presentation, if you go to the next slide, on mixed use and some of the issues that we're seeing about mixed use. So we're going to define mixed use as more than one use in the same project. Next slide, Paul, thank you. And you can see vertical mixed use, and next slide, and horizontal mixed use. So it's vertical, one use, above another, and next slide, versus one use next to another. So there are multiple ways of being able to look at mixed use. And as you can see, mixed use really can work, but if you'll go to the next slide, and we all know where these projects are, sometimes it doesn't. So in terms of mixed use best practices, there are a number of things that need to be considered. And you know, we need to execute these projects well, but we also need to recognize that retail is not the only way to activate a ground floor, and retail does not belong everywhere. Of all the land use types, retail is the most finicky, and it is also the most site specific. As more and more retail space comes online because of downsizing, it's going to become even more so. If you go to the next slide, please. And one more. So retail facilities are particularly important to consider in mixed use projects. But it's really important to remember that parking and access and visibility, particularly in suburban environments, are just as important for mixed-use projects, and maybe even more so than traditional projects, because mixed-use projects are going to be competing with legacy projects where you drive in, everything's on the ground level, you don't have structured parking. And it's also going to be important to make sure that you've got service areas thought out, that you've got adequate clear height, that you've thought through vertical transportation, and where are boring things like HVAC and refrigeration equipment going to be remoted in the project? This often ends up causing a problem with building height limits, and we can get into that a little bit more in the Q&A if there's a question about it. Next slide. Authentic commercial districts also really tend to need to evolve rather than being produced. There is a McMain Street risk that can happen when you just plop an entire district down. And it's important to have appropriate massing of facades and, again, visibility, as we talked about, and to be thinking through storefronts well. Next slide. The pedestrian environment, needless to say, is incredibly important, particularly for specialty retail uses. And just as we talk about complete streets, I think it's very important to be thinking about complete sidewalks. And so this slide is going to give a number of points about complete sidewalks, but the one I want to highlight is that they're an opportunity for retail and the public realm to come together. That's where the two meet. So it's incredibly important to be doing sidewalks well. Next slide. Signage is not only key for retailers to announce their presence, but it's also a way to create a functional and aesthetic commercial district with some degree of uniformity, while at the same time allowing for individualism between retailers. Lighting, likewise, can be extremely important. Next slide, please. To the extent that shared parking schemes have not been thought of, I highly recommend that they be researched and the Community Development Department begin to make recommendations for how shared parking can begin to allow for more efficient use of space. Next slide. I'm going to go one more slide. So this is a mixed-use project that's actually built in the Central Valley. The purple was flex space. It was allowed to be office, live, work, retail, what have you. And the red space was mandated to be retail. And if you go to the next slide, the stuff that was that allowed for flexibility was leased 100% when the project opened. The space that was mandated to be dedicated for retail took 3 years to lease. The reason for this was that the stipulation on how the project had to be was not connected to demand in the area. So again, this goes to how we want to be looking at ground floor uses and whether or not we want to be mandating that they should be retail. So next slide. So retail consolidation means that there are fewer retailers left to fill existing space. And I want to say that with COVID, we're experiencing 10 years of evolution of retail packed into a one-year package. Next slide. Landlords are backfilling space with non and quasi-retail uses, some of which don't generate sales tax. Next slide. And so municipalities are seeing hits to their general funds as sales tax revenue decline. Next slide. Codes and specific plans often demand project design attributes that the market may not demand and that may not be viable. I want to pull this thought all together, and that is that I don't think that legislating certain uses into space is viable. It really needs to be tied to market demand, and there should be flexibility because market demand changes over time. But the other thing that's really important is that a quasi-retail use that does not generate sales tax is not incompatible with retail uses that do, because they do generate traffic and generate cross-shopping. And these kinds of dynamic retail districts are the sort of thing that we want to be creating, and really the place, I think, where community development and economic development come together. And I think if you go to the next slide, I'm done.
Thank you so much, David. Appreciate it. That was a lot of information really quickly. We'll get to questions at the end. Next, I'm happy to introduce Ed Del Beccaro, who will cover both the hotel and office market. Ed is the San Francisco Bay Area manager for TIRR PRI Commercial, a brokerage firm specializing in leasing, consulting, and advisory services for a broad range of markets, including office, industrial, life sciences, hospitality, retail, and medical. Ed has over 40 years of experience in the Bay Area real estate market. He has leased, sold, and aided in the development of over 2 million square feet of real estate. He is also very active in the community and economic development. He currently serves as the vice chair of the East Bay Economic Development Alliance. He's a board member on the Walnut Creek Chamber of Commerce and has served multiple roles on the East Bay Leadership Council, including president, vice president, and chair of the Transportation Task Force. Ed, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Can you let me I can't turn my video on. You have to Paul, can you turn my video on? Well, you don't need to see me. Just look at my slides. How about that?
I think I just tried to send a request, but.
Can you see my slides?
No.
Uh-oh. So I tried to start my video.
There we go. We see it.
So can you see my slides now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I want to thank Mayor Halliday and the city council members for this opportunity.
Oh, they went away. I saw them for a second.
I haven't touched anything.
I can share the slides. Just give me a second, Ed.
Okay.
If you like.
As I was saying, I want to thank Paul, city manager. I also want to take some pride in the city of Hayward. My wife is a graduate of Cal State. We still call it Cal State Hayward, where she finished her degree and is a credentialed teacher. So let me know when you see my slides.
Let me see here.
Can you see them?
Not yet, almost. There we go.
There we go.
Okay, so go to the second slide. Next slide.
There you go.
I could do it. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because Jason already did that. I just want to put in context of the East Bay. You can see the overall picture of the East Bay County versus Hayward. There's 80,000 jobs in the immediate city of Hayward. You can see where we compare with population. And over time, the population of Hayward and the East Bay will be going up, which is important. We go to the next slide, which is the hotel market. This is not a good story currently. So first of all, this is building sales, not volume. So Bay Area hotel volume of sales has gone down over the last 3 years, since 18 to 2020. And as other people have mentioned, David and Jason, COVID is accelerating some trends. In this slide, you can again see hotel revenues in 2020 through August, when I have the last data, have dropped 65 to 70% in the Bay Area. Hospitality is a major employer of people. Hotels and restaurants alone in the East Bay have lost 135,000 jobs in this area, in the whole Bay Area. And then you can see the number of sales volume of going down in terms of hotels. And again, if people need these slides later on, I can give them questions. In this slide, excuse me, occupancy is a major driver. And you can see how in the Bay Area, the last column, how occupancies are actually trending anywhere from 25 to 30%. Hotels need to be 60 to 70% occupied to break even. And you don't build new hotels unless you're averaging 80% occupancy. So you can see the various areas, the California average, everybody is down except for a couple areas like Inland Empire, High Sierras, but you can see it's not a good story. So summarizing, because I'll be covering two areas. Hotel revenues are down in 2020 through August. You can see how much, reflecting low occupancies of 25 to 30%. That means these hotels are losing money. You see the number of jobs lost in the Bay Area for just this one sector alone. Hotels feed restaurants, by the way. People stay in hotels and visit the local restaurants, so double whammy. In the East Bay alone, 31,000 such restaurant and hotel jobs have been lost during this period of time since February. This is an important stat. Hotel appraisal values have dropped 30%, according to Wells Fargo. The reason why that's a significant number, this determines whether or not new hotels can be built, or better or worse, if existing hotels will be foreclosed on or not. So CMBS loans, which are commercial-backed securities, The way a lot of hotels are financed is there's individual loans given and then they're bundled together in a package. So right now, $32 billion of loans nationwide are being given over to special servicers for possible foreclosure or rental or deal forgiveness. So therefore, we're predicting in first and second quarter, because we're predicting now that we're going to be living in COVID type environments at least through to next year until the vaccine is works and people are getting used to coming back. But we're going to be looking for foreclosures and debt sales in first and second quarter. Therefore, new hotel financing is non-existent because of the low vacancies, and local owners, this is important, are not making loan payments in certain cases. Hotels on an optimistic level are not expected to recover until the end of 2023. Tourism and business is down, with partial recovering hopefully occurring next year. Hayward is a central location for hotels. It gets a lot of overflow from Silicon Valley. During the golden era, 10 million years ago, February is now 10 million years ago, people would stay in Hayward, Fremont, and South 880 corridor because, there was 400 a night, 300 a night in San Mateo. And Hayward was convenient going across the bridge, but we don't expect that to be covered for the next 2 or 3 years. So what to do? You might not have known that some hotels are already being converted to office, and you'll see more of that. Some are being converted across the country to residential. And in Alameda County alone, there's going to be 3 hotels in the Oakland airport area that are converted to homeless shelters through state funds. You'll see more of this. So what should we do? Since this sector is going to be slow to recover, cities should consider and create mixed-use concepts of hotels, residential, and office on the same site to create traffic, streamline the process, cut fees. This is going to be controversial. Cut TOT, not increase. Raising TOT today or next year is not the time. So I know there's a thing on the ballot, but if you're struggling, you're about to lose your hotel, if you're doing 25% occupancy, this could be a deal killer. A lot of hotelers are changing their hotel business model, and then they might be permanently mixing office services into the overnight stays in the business concept hotel. This could be a good thing being next to Silicon Valley and all the maker tech. So that's the hotel segment. Now I'm going to go to office. In office, it's not as bad as hotels, but it's not that great. So it's not industrial, it's not retail. So you can see on the left columns, the availability of space has increased as vacancy has gone up. There are some statistics that in the average office space in the suburban ring, that would be San Mateo, East Bay, North Bay, almost 70 to 80% of the people are working from home. Over time, this causes issues. Some companies are contracting. COVID, like in retail, is accelerating certain trends in the office market. In the office market, you're going to see more of what we call the cube space, the Dilbert space, the back offices for banks, insurance companies ought to be automated. So this is not going to be a major job employer of the future. So as banks, insurance companies automate their functions and or move to Sacramento and or move out of state, we're going to see a different kind of a job mix. Net absorption, as you can see in the next column, quarter 3 has, this is again in the Bay Area, you see has increased, negative absorption of 1 million feet. By the way, go to the top headline. This is important. So at one time, 10 million years ago in February, the San Francisco was the envy of the world. Center of Silicon Valley, next to Silicon Valley, low vacancies. We now have over 8 million vacant feet in San Francisco alone. And the next number is wrong. Almost 5 million of it, 6 million of it is sublease. So what does that mean? There's 2 different trends going on. One's beneficial for Hayward and the East Bay, one's not so good. So as office space becomes more and more vacant, it's more difficult to build buildings. But what is also happening is the downtowns of the major cities, LA, Seattle, New York, Manhattan, Los Angeles, and San Francisco are becoming ghost towns, COVID fears. So some companies are going to be leasing space in the suburban ring. So that's where Hayward could be a beneficiary of some of the migration from downtown Oakland and or San Francisco. in the last column shows you where asking rents have fallen. This is an important number where you see 343. It takes $450 a foot to build a new office building. So that's the average asking rent. Actual real rates are actually lower. They're $250 to $3 for office space. Again, we just demonstrate what's happening in San Francisco. You can see how bad it's gotten in terms of the number of space that's available. In this one, we can see Hayward is actually doing better. Over the last 3 or 4 years, the vacancy is not that high. It's only 4%. But now absorption could be, there could be negative absorption in the next, this year and then next year. So talking about questions on what Hayward should do. Suburban office rents in general are at $210 to $230, and as opposed to $450. These are full service, where everything's included in the rental rate per square foot per month. Over time, we think this recovers in 222, 223, and for maybe several years, Hayward, East Bay, South 880 corridor will benefit from tenants relocating from San Francisco, tech tenants migrating from San Francisco to follow their workforce to South 880, including Fremont, Hayward, Tri-Valley, and Tracy. We do not predict new office, pure office. This is not tech or biotech. We do not see building construction at least until 224 on BART stations, TODs. And we're going to start hearing, unfortunately, more about the Bay Area exodus. This 220 is the first year where Northern California had a negative population, where more people, more jobs left the Northern California than went into the Bay Area. So as part of the Bay Area, that's not a good trend. And then you're going to hear some other things where MTC, to meet clean air mandates, wants 3 days a week for above 50 employees. They're floating that trial balloon. It's a bad idea, I think. We have to work at home. State taxes and business taxes are increasing. So tenants are moving out of the Bay Area to Sacramento and also out of the area into adjoining states. Not a good trend. So ABAG MTC predicts, if you look in the middle, we won't spend much time here. The longer COVID lasts, the more the collateral damage to the economy. So we might not have recovery until 225. And my last slide, I'm keeping under the time limit, is this is a mandated, maybe necessary health crisis, but we didn't have an overbuilding of housing. In the suburban East Bay, we did not have an overbuilding of office buildings. And so the fact is very few new pure office buildings from Walnut Creek to Hayward to Fremont to Tri-Valley. Most new buildings were medical or tech-related build-to-suits. But the East Bay didn't benefit from that. Oakland's the exception with a couple new buildings. So the economy partially reopened in last June. People are going back to work each month, but the Bay Area is actually one of the slower metros across the country, even compared to LA, which is different. And as we said before, COVID has accelerated various trends. So the two markets that are oversupplied and will take the hardest to recover, as been talked about, is retail, hospitality. Suburban office is going to be sideways for a couple of years. Housing in the suburban market is going up. Believe it or not, in the third ring, as we call it, which is North County, Elk Grove, and Tracy and Gilroy, which commute into the Inner Bay, house prices are up as opposed to San Francisco. We expect that house to continue. Jason already talked about industrial, so as an office broker, I wish I was an industrial broker. And that's my speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ed. Appreciate that. Appreciate you taking the time and staying under time.
I kept under time.
Last but not least, we have a presentation on the multifamily and housing market trends from Mr. Tim Cornwell. He's a principal at the Concord Group, a provider of real estate advisory services to leading developers, home builders, and financial institutions. The Concord Group provides support through all stages of planning, entitlement, financing, development, building, and marketing. Tim serves as a principal in the San Francisco office, where he has served for a decade. He's completed over 850 engagements. He is an expert in market-based urban infill development strategies and a frequent speaker on multifamily development trends. He currently leads the affordable housing market practice with over 40 engagements completed annually in support of funding applications, acquisitions, and planning efforts. Tim is also very active with the Urban Land Institute and SPUR. Thank you so much for being here, Tim.
Yeah, my pleasure. So everybody can see me, hear me, see my slides. We're ready to rock and roll, correct?
Good to go.
Okay, here we go. So I'm in the enviable position of sitting last in this esteemed group of panelists, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all. I'm going to talk, before I actually jump into the slides, about some of the larger trends we're seeing, some agreement in what was said within each of the other product verticals over the last hour or so. And probably some difference in terms of how we see the world and really what's next. Okay, so anybody reading the news, I mean, I think it's really important to say several things that actually I'm kind of interested that have not been voiced in these presentations so far. Is just to talk about the economic disruption writ large. Right, where we are today, obviously the stay-at-home orders, right? The some people call it a medically induced coma that we're in, the safety and security measures that we're in right now, have basically led to the loss of several 100,000 jobs across the Bay Area region in a very short period of time. This is among the most calamitous and most precipitous drop in economic reality that any of us in any of our careers have really experienced. Okay, so as we start to think about what's next, it's important to really understand that this level of disruption is unprecedented. Okay, within that context, though, I want to say, anyone reading the news from a multifamily perspective will have started to see articles over the summer about the disruption in that industry as a whole, right? And I'll show you some of this data as we really walk through my slides. But in the end, you're seeing stories of double-digit rent declines in many gateway cities around the United States, right? I like to say that, when you really look at the reasons for living in those environments, there really are twofold. Number one, over the last several years is access to incredible world-beating employment and very high salaries. And number two, bars, restaurants, social life, fun, outside lands, music festivals, all those things that really kind of draw you to those high-end Bay Area locations, okay? Both of those two reasons are turned off now and in the foreseeable future. So the level of disruption is really, like I said, unprecedented, okay? If you look at the data, and by the way, our firm, we work all over the United States, internationally. I look at data in LA and Denver and San Francisco and Seattle and Portland and DC and Boston and New York, all over the country. And some of the most expensive markets, those that have really, frankly, won the game over the last 15 years, as we look at, multifamily markets with these differential outcomes, are seeing rent declines as much as double digits, if not higher, okay, with 2 and 3 month concessions very common in most of their recent deliveries. Right? In San Francisco, by the way, the kind of core of, the innovation engine within the Bay Area, right? The driver of many of these markets across the whole region. That number right this second is down 29.5% since February. The most precipitous drop that anybody has seen in our industry in anybody's career. Okay. But what I think is fascinating is that there are some incredibly differential outcomes as we start to parse that data between different locations. We've heard about the urban-suburban interface. We've heard about, housing markets and what was just voiced by Ed, of course, some of the markets in and around the kind of first ring, second ring, third ring Bay Area locations where housing is getting more expensive. These things are true. And in fact, when you look at the experience for Hayward right now, and I'll show you this as we finish up the slides just to kind of see the point, okay, we see rents down less than 5%. We see very minimal market occupancy impacts in the rental market, and it's become the role of Hayward within that larger marketplace, okay? And there is some contextual issues at the US level that I want to walk through really quickly to start to explain the why and reflect how we move forward from here in these, this period of incredible differential outcomes. Okay, so I'm going to flip slides really, really quickly. Oh, whoa, okay. So first things first, okay, one of the reasons that we've had this ebb and flow period over the last several years in the Bay Area is really about demographic context around the United States. I feel like it's really funny, actually. Tomorrow or the next day, I do a speech at ULI's, virtual fall meetings for, I feel like now the 14th year in a row around what millennials want from a housing choice perspective. So I feel as an industry, we desperately need to get a new topic. But one of the things that we've really, leveraged over the last several years, of course, is that that person around the United States was in their late 20s and very early 30s, okay? And when you look at the peak population, by the way, this blue line is really just simply American population by ages. When you look at that spike right there, the spike that's sort of defining the peak of the millennial population, they're in their late 20s right now. And when we think about what's next, when we understand some of the suburbanization that's going on, we have to pay attention in development to where those people are over the next 5 years, right? When you think about sort of the household distribution of our country, and again, from the United States level, one of the reasons people have moved to very high-end multifamily units in very, very expensive cities around those job cores with fun and bars and restaurants and everything else is that they have been that perfect storm demographically. Okay, when we go forward, when we look at the American population, and specifically looking at those in the life stage of raising kids, those between 35 and 55 years old, we were massively negative as a country in terms of growth of that specific population right up until about 2019. Okay, so really interesting. Some of the accelerative effects, right? We've talked about that. We've heard that word many times in each of these presentations. The accelerative effects that we've seen from COVID are actually in the context of some significant trends that were already out there and ready to be realized when you look at these multifamily markets around the United States, okay? And when you look at the next 5 years, okay, with decisions really around where do you put your kids in school? I like to say the -2 to 2-year-old kid, right? The growing population of those that are really raising kids, the rise of the suburbs and the rise of the rest, especially in an environment where so much of the rent and income and house price growth has been in those top 5, 15 gateway cities that many of us could all name on this Zoom call right now, is very interesting and very different than what we've been seeing. Okay, so moving forward, right? We talk a lot about the wealth gap. We talk a lot about income gaps. I'm going to talk about this a lot because, by the way, this is the call to action as it relates to Hayward's role within the larger marketplace, right? What we're seeing and the real differential outcomes on a human by human level. Okay, but I think it's really important to sort of remember this as we talk about housing that's growing. Okay, we talk about home prices that are increasing, and in fact, on the for sale side of the equation, me personally, as a professional in this environment, have been incredibly surprised that in the face of this kind of economic disruption, in a recessionary period, we've seen home prices grow massively. Okay. And when you look at that, it becomes the further have and have notification of our society and some of those challenges that happen, those challenges that really make the Bay Area quite difficult to live in for those that have been here for many, many years. Okay. And when we talk about this question, I want to say this, right, is specifically as it relates to the rental side of the equation. Okay. When we go through, the average net worth for households under 35 in the United States of America, okay, the average net worth, all assets minus all liabilities, is $6,682. So irrespective of the flexibility and the challenges from an income perspective and qualification and where we are now with an incredibly low interest rate environment, the fact of the matter is they don't have a prayer to get to the down payment, right? So as we talk about this question of how do we, really evaluate our communities and really drive to those locations where we can build product across a variety of income spectra, the down payment issue really is the gating mechanism. And that does several things. Number one, it puts for sale housing further out of reach for a key part of our housing structure. Okay. And number two, and really importantly, it keeps more affluent people renting and in fact continues to accelerate displacement already occurring within these communities. Okay. And so by the way, this next slide I want to show and kind of talk about the data really quickly because I think it's really important to understand the drivers and the realities in a place like Hayward. Okay, so this is census data, so there's a little bit of lag. So this isn't exactly a COVID trend, but it's the context on which we're seeing these COVID trends really mature. Okay, and what it's telling you, by the way, is that, and by the way, I'm sure you've heard a lot about the renter nation, more and more people renting at a higher clip, and all of those challenges of home ownership. But when we look at it, a couple things sort of jump off the page. The first is that we've seen about an 8% increase in the total number of renters in the city of Hayward in a 5-year trailing period. That's pretty incredible, actually. It's a pretty aggressive growth. But when we look at the high income renters, okay, 100 to 150,000 bucks, 150,000 bucks and over, those numbers have actually increased more than 100% in a 5-year period of time. Okay, this is not all wine and roses, by the way, and the call to action is all about the fact that in addition to higher income individuals, right? When we look at the displacement of people from what has historically been more affluent places across the Bay Area seeking value with commutability to those kind of higher end jobs, right? It's also about the fact that we've seen overcrowding grow pretty significantly. We've seen displacement accelerate in this period of time, right? And we need to make we need to hold more jobs for each one of the individual households just to pay the rent. Okay, so when we look at sort of what's ultimately happening in the data and in the mapping, right, when we look at what's happening to median rents, you can see, 20 years ago, those high income locations across the Bay Area and how that plays out on the right, the sort of, if you will, the market pricing is adjusted just because of the sheer imbalance between supply and demand. Okay, I want to address really, really quickly, and I know I'm growing very fast, but I want to address some of this conversation about the net out migration, okay, and displacement across the Bay Area as a whole. So this graph, we're going to show two of these actually, and what it really just shows is every single dot is a unit that's out there in the marketplace, and what we're doing here is we're comparing this, San Francisco across some of the other options. In this case, we're using Denver and Portland and Seattle. Okay, and every dot is a unit. The x-axis is unit size, the y-axis is monthly rent. And just simply to make this point is that when you look at studios that are $3,000 and up, one bedrooms that are $35,000 and $4,000, and two bedrooms for the minimum that you can really get to in many cases for a family, that are in the $4,500 range, people look for other options. Okay, and those other options, when we look at things from a regional perspective, are quite a bit cheaper. Okay, and so I just want to show this because unfortunately there's not a lot of great data on the in and out migration. And I would say that frankly, what we've seen over the last decade is the out migration, those continual pressures. And I'm sure everyone who grew up in the Bay Area like me understands that more and more people every year are displaced, right? But that's over the last decade been more than made up by all the massive in migration that's happening. Okay, so these two just are fun to look at. This is really a U-Haul sort of query where we look, what does it cost to rent a 15-foot truck? Okay, what fits for a 1 to 2 bedroom apartment and rent it on a one-way move from San Francisco and drive it to Boise? $1,700. Okay, same truck, same day, different direction, $270. Right. So directionally speaking, we know what's happening as we look at sort of what's next within the Bay Area. Okay, we know rents are down pretty consistently. I don't want to kind of belabor this point too much, but I do want to say this, is that it's a very interesting conversation because so many developers, our clients say to me, we have this typical flight to quality. Okay, as we go into a recessionary period, people actually end up moving to, more quality locations and higher end locations. But it's actually been 100% the inverse during this period of time because of what I would argue near-term disruption in those urban amenities and the fact that the aspirational locations have become more dangerous locations during this period of time that we have the medical disruption. Okay, and I just want to sort of make this point, right? This slide, and really specifically the overall rent change that we have here in the top right, actually shows what I was talking about earlier. Is San Francisco rents are down almost 30% since February. Occupancies have gone from roughly 95, 96% to 89% in a very short period of time, and those are not market performance metrics that we're seeing in Hayward. Okay, the best data, it's a little bit more difficult to find because there's a little less consistent competitive set, but it's down about 5%, a little less than 5% when you look at the city of Hayward, and less than a 1% decline in overall occupancy rates. And frankly, when we think about kind of what's out there, the reason is that instead of going to Boise, right, instead of going to Salt Lake and Denver and Portland and Seattle and other options, instead of going to Tracy, instead of going to Sacramento or Reno, right, there is a closer in option that is, reasonably affordable. Okay, and the role that Hayward and specifically the 80 corridor plays as a whole, okay, really can ultimately start to serve people a lot closer to median income. And so, look, the call to action is very, very simple, right? Is number one, there has to be protection of existing residents, right? By the way, I think we need to be very, very careful about this as it relates to unintended consequences across the overall income curve. We need to produce new development so that as we get back to kind of a more normalized supply and demand situation, which we do believe happens, okay, we don't continually displace those that are in that very quintessential missing middle, right? And we really need to understand and start to figure out as an industry, this is not something that the city can do, but figure out as an industry how we bring costs down. Because the fundamental problem is that cities like Hayward just have simply not seen the level of development of so many other within the Bay Area because of the challenges making deals pencil, right? Exactly the same comment as was just made by Ed as it relates to office is, what do we really need to make things work, right? And we haven't, interestingly, seen costs come down as much as we have seen revenues impacted in many of the multifamily markets that we're working in around the United States. Okay, so as we look at it, lots going on, incredibly differential outcomes, new time of American move in a very interesting demographic context. But frankly, when you look at the city of Hayward and the role of Hayward, held up very, very well in the context of what we're seeing around the country. So with that, I'll turn it back to you. I know when everyone went a little long, trying to talk fast, but I'm more than willing for any questions and comments from the group.
Thank you so much, Tim. Mayor, that concludes the 4 presenters, and they're happy to take questions.
Thank you. And I'm going to go to public comment and questions first before we go to council. So, Madam City Clerk, I do believe we have, from what I can see, at least one request to speak from the public.
That's correct, Mayor. I'm happy to announce the
Go
first.
ahead and open public comment, and you can go to that speaker. Mr. Gunn, I believe.
Perfect, thank you. First speaker, Jesse, please go ahead and unmute.
Hello, thank you for taking my comment. So I wanted to say my biggest concern for me is the housing cost and making sure that we can keep the residents that already live in Hayward still here in Hayward without having to find somewhere else. And so I just wanted to following this, to restate that was my own personal priority. And thank you to Councilmember Zemania for listening to my concerns the other day about this as well. So with that, since we know that there could be an exodus out of the larger cities and people coming into Hayward, I see that as an opportunity for landlords to raise rents because now their market or the demand is higher for people looking for places out of the cities. And I want to make sure that whatever policies that go forward from this, take that into consideration and that we don't make it harder on people that live here to stay here. The other thing that I had was regarding the comments about the tech industry and industrial areas being so close to the freeway because they can get access to workers easier, and that Hayward isn't necessarily the prime place to find these employees. I think the solution to that is to have more programs that will train our young people that are in high school now and maybe just coming out of high school to get these skills that these companies want. And when these skills are there, that's how we attract the businesses here that will, pay the city's bills. So thank you very much for listening. And I know that one of the goals of the council is to keep housing costs low. I've seen you do many meetings on that topic. I just want to make sure that stays a priority going in, and that we don't see falling falling housing costs and rents as a negative, that we do see it as a positive. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.
I don't see any other speakers at the moment. Is that correct, Madam City Clerk?
That's correct, Madam Mayor.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close public comment. And wow, that was a lot of information. And I really do want to thank our economic development staff for arranging it, and all of you who joined us this evening. I know I'm acquainted with Mr. Del Vaccaro as a fellow member of the East Bay Economic Development Alliance Board of Directors. So it's nice to see you again. And I don't know that I've met the rest of you, but I really will keep and go through that. That was just a lot of information that we just received, and it was a little hard to kind of follow all that. You're not used to just reading graphs and charts really fast, but I think we have copies of it, the council, and I know they're available online for anyone, I believe. are the PowerPoint, would they be available to the public if?
Yes, they will be, Mayor.
Go online.
Okay, great. Great. So, we will start with Councilmember Zermeño.
Okay, you are correct, Mayor. There's quite a bit of information. I really want to make sure that we receive that email and the presentations later on. So I really have a question for each one of the presenters. Let's see, Mr. Ovadia. So they're all available, is my guess, right?
That's correct. They should be all available.
All right. So he did mention that we have a lengthy entitlement process for in the industrial areas. So what is one way to shorten that entitlement process in order to make it more appealing for industries to move to Hayward? Any ideas, any suggestions?
Yeah, great question. We have seen the entitlement process take significantly longer in every city in the Bay Area. It's not unique to one particular city. This is partly due to the fact that a lot of these projects are more complicated. We're very late in the development cycle here, meaning we've been building new buildings for industrial purposes for quite some time now. So cities are becoming more constrained in terms of their ability to support additional traffic. And I think candidly that would be the best way to speed things up is for developers presenting their project to have their traffic mitigation plan something that is one of the leading documents as far as their initial feedback and submittals to the city. So where I see a lot of the challenges, having to resubmit incomplete applications or applications that may be missing certain components. And candidly, I think that's one of the most important ones. And then typically where we're getting held up is when the project does have to go do a full EIR.
Okay.
Hopefully that answers some of it.
Fine. I just want to make sure that city staff and the planning division hears this materials that we can actually shorten that period. Mr. Greenfelder, retail trends. I like the idea of specialty retail. So what are some of the ways to attract them? We have a Doc's Wine Shop, which is specialty. We have cobblers. How can we get some more?
Well, so, retail is all demand driven. So the way to get more specialty retail is to create more demand for those kinds of goods and services. And that is a function of population increase. It's a function of just increasingly of disposable income. Because commodities are going to tend to be purchased before specialty items. We're going to make sure that we've paid the mortgage, shoes for the kids, and groceries before we go out to dinner. But it's also really highly dependent on a sense of place. And because if you're going to go purchase specialty goods, whether it's a dinner out or whether it's clothing or something else, because you're using discretionary income during discretionary time, free time, there is more of an emotional component to the purchase, which means that a sense of place becomes increasingly important. You're not going to, look at your partner and say, let's go out for a really nice dinner, and you end up going to a Burger King, right? So sense of place ends up becoming important, and this dovetails back into the notion of what sort of retail is being planned and for where. So if, for example, you've got demand, let's say, for an aggregate of 100,000 square feet of retail space, and I'm just picking that because it's a round number, but retail is being demanded in every mixed-use project, and all that adds up to 125,000 square feet of retail space. you're going to have 25,000 feet of vacancy. It's going to be important to make sure that retail is congregated in the right place. Retail likes mass. It likes critical mass.
Okay.
And so I think that a focus on creating a really robust retail district as opposed to dispersion of retail is something that's also going to create the environment in which specialty retail is going to prosper.
Okay, thank you. Your background is a carless street. Do you favor carless retail streets?
Situationally, yes. There's certainly been a lot of talk of that because of COVID, and we're trying to create space in order to be able to have people out and about and yet maintain proper distance from each other.
Okay.
But we can certainly find all kinds of examples of streets that have cars that still have really robust retail districts. And I'll point you, for example, to 4th Street in Berkeley.
Right.
I think that what I would advocate, and if the police chief is listening in, I'm going to ask him to sign off for the next 10 seconds, is you want an environment that is really easily jaywalkable.
Yep, true.
You want a place where you can say, oh, look at that over on the other side of the street. And you can safely go dash to the other side of the street where everything is close enough together that you can see it and you can access it. And I don't think that that means carless necessarily.
Okay. All right. Wife and I have done that several times. I thank you. Mr. Bacaro, who he and I just met on LinkedIn today. Let's see. So I really had just a question about setting up. How do we attract folks to set up offices in our downtown? We need a lunch crowd. So that's the question. Is there the answer to that?
Yeah, there are several things. And David mentioned this. If you look at now, the purpose of downtowns is to generate street traffic.
Right.
So I would create flexibility to allow commercial uses, non-retail uses, to go on ground floors.
Okay.
And bankers, mortgage bankers, CPAs are an ecosystem that all feed the restaurants and then in turn track the bigger support network companies. So Hayward has a central location being across the bridge. There's going to be a migration of companies across the bridge. A lot of service industries can't afford to be in San Mateo and Santa Clara anymore. So therefore, as those jobs come across the bridge, Hayward's the first catcher's mitt. How does the city set up processes for use permits that are easier? If use permits could be over the counter, that already fit in with the existing zoning as opposed to a public hearing. Small businesses in almost every city now have to, for use permits, have to go to public hearings, and that could be $18,000 to $40,000, and small companies can't afford that. They're borrowing on their credit card in some cases. So if we could do use permits and some similar types over the counter, some cities have experimented with that. And if small business generates, small business can be 30% of your office absorption.
Right.
And then the big companies will come over time, as you preserve areas around the BART station.
Okay, so we will work on that with our city staff plan division. Thank you very much. And the last one was on housing, et cetera. So Mr. Cornwell, so it's good to see that Hayward is affordable. However, we live in the most expensive area in the United States, so it's still unreachable to many of our residents. So how do we maintain the affordability that we have? We don't want to lose any more folks, and it is good news that rents have gone down. So how do we keep that up? How do we maintain that? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously that's a very complicated question at many levels, but my personal view, there's no silver bullet, although as much as we want to look at the universe of potential interventions, the best way forward is to continue in however we possibly can to deliver new supply, right? As we get into this question really around each of these product types and what the drivers are, whether retail is a demand business or, is sort of ultimately housing cost of supply business. The end of the day, it's about delivering new housing at many different economic levels, right? That's using subsidies and making sure that we protect and sort of push back against displacement, right? That's leveraging funding sources, as was talked about at the beginning of the call. That's making sure that we build market rate housing. That's working with developers to really understand and target markets and try to figure out costs, right? Sometimes that's about fees. So we can deliver to, multiple market segments and make sure that, at the end of the day, the truism here is that in a market economy, the most affluent people win if we don't build enough housing, right? So it's about making sure that we continue to generate that scale of supply.
And also make sure that we have affordable and for the folks who can afford.
All right, right.
Of course.
But at the end of the day, I think that's an important concept: is that market rate housing is by definition affordable housing as well, because it allows people that otherwise would be displaced to stay in their unit by that person that comes in to take the market rate unit. Right. Okay. Important concept.
I thank all four of you, Paul and Kelly. Thank you very much. Very, very informative, and I think our city will benefit with all this. All right, Mayor, thank you.
You're muted, Mayor.
Yes, I see that. Thank you. Councilmember Marquez, you're next.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you to all the presenters. I'm just going to start off briefly. I believe it was Ed that gave us the analysis with regard to the hotel industry. So I'd just like to ask our economic development manager if he's going to be joining the next committee meeting when we'll be discussing the hotel at Mission Crossings. I think his analysis is very, very beneficial and understood well about the TOT, but this council is very disciplined, and hopefully it does pass the measure, and we will not be increasing it until we increase our vacancy rates. But what are your thoughts? I don't know if you're familiar with that project, and I apologize, I'm not going to use last names. So Ed, are you familiar with Mission Crossings, the project at the old Ford site on Mission? Where
yes.
There's okay. So thoughts about best use for that space, that land along Mission Boulevard?
Well, several thoughts. Unfortunately, so let's assume over time, Hayward is, because of central location, is a good hotel location. I can be in Hayward and get Tri-Valley. I can be in Hayward and get Oakland. I can be in Hayward and get North San Jose Airport, and I can get the overflow from Silicon Valley. So over time, 10, 15 years, Hayward is a good hotel market because of central location and access. And then, when eventually the new bridge is built across the Dumbarton, that helps this area too, because then it integrates it more. The next 3 years is not going to be good for hotels. You're going to see foreclosures, unfortunately, and you're going to see big chains actually get hurt. So next 3 years, I don't see any new construction just because of recovery. So then how do you, so do you keep the land vacant? Or do you allow some residential on it? Unfortunately, I don't think retail is going to be as strong in that area yet. You can have what we call local neighborhood veneer retail. I invented that, David. I don't even know that's a concept. Thin retail, where instead of, you need about 400 units to supply 10,000 feet of amenity retail.
You want thick retail.
But veneer retail means shallow bay depths. So you might have a cafe that's only 20 feet deep as opposed to a 60-foot or 30-foot bay.
Let's stay away.
You have walkability along the street. But allow commercial uses, because again, as David mentioned, you need traffic generators. And so how do you increase walkability and traffic?
Okay. And then I noticed on one of your PowerPoint slides, you mentioned that there is a percentage of hotel operators that aren't paying their mortgages. Do you have an idea of what that number is? Are we talking about 20, 30%?
You hit the nail. And that's why you saw in some of the various stimulus packages, people wanted direct subsidies to the hotel industry. I'm not sure how much came out of that. They did qualify for PP loans. PP loans had to be paid back. Unfortunately, with PP loans, 75% had to go to employees and not to mortgages until a little bit later. That's still being argued a little bit. So you're going to start, we're predicting, unfortunately, first and second quarter foreclosures.
Okay. And then back to the Mission Crossing site on Mission Boulevard. Are you familiar with any other communities dealing with something similar and have adopted something to activate that space that's, I don't know, pop-up, outdoor recreational, public art? Are you aware of anything else like that being explored?
Well, some cities around the Bay Area or even Northern California, LA, are, you can activate the space with markets and things like that, but that doesn't help the owner. So, unfortunately, the immediate demand is always going to be housing. So, because there's just a crying need for housing. How do you reserve land for hotel use down the road? Because hotels will be needed again. And so I'm not sure how to answer the question, frankly, until the markets recover.
Okay, thank you. And then I'm going to switch gears to David. Very comprehensive, flexible approach on retail. I appreciate the information. I didn't hear anything mentioned about recreational gyms, your thoughts about the future of those uses.
You mean as it relates to COVID?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
My thoughts are that, gyms rely on a couple of things. One is they rely on a certain amount of density of ability to have density of users. And that's not something that we can have right now. So you're seeing the likes of 24-hour fitness having, all kinds of issues. You're seeing bankruptcies. You're seeing rumors of bankruptcies. And then smaller gyms that tend to be more pay per use as opposed to, pay a monthly fee and then ideally don't ever come back. And I think we've all had one of those memberships at one point or another in our lives. When you're going to yoga, and still do. If you're going to yoga or Pilates or Stretch Lab or, whatever it is, those are pay for use. But again, you need to be able to get throughput. And it's just not something that we can do safely right now. I think there's some people that are willing to take the chance. I think there's some business owners that are, really rather desperate and are taking the chance, even though they don't necessarily feel comfortable doing it. But it's, I hate to say it, but it's a complete mess. And it's how do you balance public health and economic activity? And gyms are a place where that doesn't balance well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then what I got from your presentation was the importance of lighting, cleanliness, retail, attracting more retail. Any other low-hanging fruit items that we could be looking at implementing?
Yes, there are a lot. So that was an hour and a half ULI webinar that I do crammed into 7 minutes. So yes, there's a lot. And, but it's probably, it's not something that I think I could expand upon in a really time sensitive manner. But I'd be happy to come back and do the more robust presentation if it's something that, that you all are interested in.
Okay, thank you. And then the first presenter, and I apologize, but I'm not going to flip through all my pages of notes, but I know you were talking about industrial use. And did I hear correctly that the e-commerce, obviously, there's a lot of viability. Hayward's a great location, our population, disposable income. But I also believe I heard you say something about the transportation impact fees. Is that correct? Looking at assessing that because of our infrastructure and the wear and tear on our roads?
Yeah, so 100% accurate. Hayward is a terrific location for for not just for e-commerce alone, but for logistics, for logistics operations. So yes, the location is primary due to its location, being central, access to the 92 freeway, close to the Port of Oakland, and access to terrific labor. The TIF really is a mechanism that cities can use to help offset a lot of the infrastructure degradation that they are experiencing, not only from the users that are accessing their roads from other cities to get to their consumers, but these are specifically for new projects that will generate a significant amount of traffic from fleet or otherwise vehicles. It's simply an idea for a way to generate some additional revenue that can be used to offset, some of the infrastructure degradation, and certainly, help balance the sales tax revenue equation. So it's merely a suggestion based on the massive savings these occupiers are getting by being able to locate in your city to service your community as their customers.
Okay.
Does that answer the question?
Are you aware of any cities exploring that right now, given the current state of COVID?
Absolutely. I think this is an alternative way to create some revenue and, in an environment where that otherwise may be difficult. So I think that it is absolutely on the table for all development projects, specifically to industrial. And furthermore, I heard one of the speakers talking about retail and some alternative uses for that. And I can tell you with certainty that occupiers for industrial, for last mile type logistics, they are considering retail locations as an alternative means to get closer to the population and closer to their customers. And that would be also something that, industrial users are focused on as well. Is the large parking, low coverage, well located big box retail locations.
Okay, great, thank you. And then I think the last presenter was Tim. Yeah, Tim. I just want to make sure, there was a lot of information, very helpful. But did you say that renters have gone up by 8%? I don't remember over what time span, but
that was basically a poll from the U.S. Census, right? So they do a statistical survey every year, American Community Survey, and that's basically a 2013 to 2018 sort of 5-year run. So an increase in about 8% in the number of households. But again, the important point is that about a more than 100% increase in the number of renter households over $100,000 of income. Right.
And the point you made that it was difficult with the down payment for.
Yeah. So there are a lot of reasons going on around that. I mean, and the renter nation's been very well studied across the country. But yeah, flexibility and difficulties around down payment and, all kinds of things that are going on for sure.
Okay. And then did you say since the shelter in place order went into effect that rent has gone down 5% in Hayward?
A little less than 5%, but yeah, on an order of magnitude perspective again. And to reiterate, the worst, declines have been in the 30% range around the Bay Area, right? So pretty amazing.
And how does that work? If someone is in a lease, does the landlord just offer, like, I don't want to lose you, I'm shaving the rent by 5%, or just help me understand?
So that's totally dependent on the specific landlord-tenant relationship and their terms. Very unlikely. Sometimes upon renewal, they're offered concessions, but that's really for the market new leases. Exactly. That doesn't mean that those landlords can't offer concessions to keep their residents so that they don't move, but I'm talking about for new market leases.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, Councilmember Mendel.
Thank you, Mayor. First, thank you all for a tremendous amount of information packed into a very short amount of time. I'm going to be off the council in a couple months. If I were going to stay on, I think I'd be watching this session over again. And I would encourage whoever is on the council, whoever is elected after November 3rd, to have them watch this and listen to this, because it gives, I think, a really good sense of where we stand, what's realistic, what's viable, and I found it really valuable. Mr. Baccaro, you couldn't hear me because I was muted, but I was cheering while you were talking about the commercial office sector, because for many years now, I've been arguing that we have more of an opportunity in that sector than we think we do, and that we need to be trying to incrementally expand. And when COVID hit, one of the things that I said back in April is that I think that will actually accelerate that trend for Hayward. And I hear you confirming that, which is, Hayward's gain, right? And a real opportunity for Hayward to try to seize that moment and attract more commercial office developments or conversions, to tie into David's point, especially in the downtown. We've already seen one that we didn't even, try to attract a retail space converting to a remote office for a large tech firm. I think there's going to be a lot more of that. I work for a tech company. I think there's going to be a lot more of that. And if there are things that we can do to streamline our, application processes, our CUP processes, to say, yes, look, commercial offices welcome here, then that might be something worth looking at from a zoning perspective. Like if commercial office is allowed in a retail zoning, for example, or a general commercial or a downtown commercial, that would sort of fit into, I think, some of what I was hearing. I also, I heard a lot in there that was sort of validating, from the various speakers, validating the strategy that we've been trying to put in place for a number of years. That the traffic impact fees, that's something we're looking at now. And I'm really excited to hear that's sort of a viable option for industrial and warehouse and other types of users, because, right now we're asking each large applicant, each large project to do its own traffic, management study and its own unique analysis, and then to fund individual improvements in the area. And to me, that feels like the slowest way to achieve the result that we want. And it might be simpler and faster and easier for applicants and streamline the process for applicants if, instead of saying, hey, you have to come up with your own, traffic management study for every project, is just instead say, all right, when you do a project of a certain size, you're going to pay a certain traffic impact fee, and the city will deal with it. We'll use the money to do what we see as best. There's still, a contribution from the developer, but at a minimal amount of pain for them in terms of time and effort and delays and controversy, and a maximum amount of flexibility for the city to use those funds in the most efficient way. So I would encourage my colleagues to move forward with that traffic impact fee in lieu of requiring traffic management studies for every single project, which is wasteful. On the housing side, I feel like we've been responding to that well. We've been increasing the inclusionary zoning incrementally, which is good. Another conversation along those lines is probably warranted. But we've also been preemptively upzoning a lot of properties around South Hayward BART, in the downtown, along Mission Boulevard, which is basically saying, yes, come, housing developers. We want denser housing here. We want more units. We want to try and meet the need. That's the kind of thing that we can do to streamline the process for potential developers. That was pointed out by a couple of the speakers, and we know it works because we've seen it happen. We upzone an area, and suddenly we've got a whole bunch of developers coming in proposing projects. Just look at my part of town around South Hayward BART as confirmation. And then the one that I'm sort of, so I generally feel like we're doing a good job and we're on the right path, and the things we're doing we just need to do more of. But the one area where I'm a little unsure of exactly how to deal with it is in the retail sector. There's going to be a lot of change there, and I appreciated David's comments about that. I think he's exactly right. I think that might be one place where we want to look at some of our existing systems and say, all right, is there additional flexibility that we need to offer? For example, I mentioned it earlier, the downtown commercial district zoning, does that have flexibility, or does it require retail on the ground floor? I believe it's flexible. We have banks, we have other commercial offices in the downtown. So I believe we're already there, but that'd be the kind of thing that we should look over and make sure that that it does provide that flexibility. Because what we don't want is to have someone who's interested in opening a commercial office in the downtown have to go through some kind of a zone change or special permission to do that. We want to be able to say, yes, that's allowed here by right. Streamline the process if we know that's what we want. And I think we do know that. And so that may be a suggestion to staff to review those and come back with proposals to change them if there are some some places where additional flexibility would be beneficial. And then, Paul, or Mr. Baccaro, is Mr. Baccaro going to be joining us at the CEDC meeting in November? To where we're talking about the Ford site and the hotel?
I will certainly invite him, Councilmember Mendel.
I hope you can, I hope you can make that, because it would be good to have your expertise there, and rather than drag it out.
We'll send me the date and I'll try.
I understand. We got to get that scheduled, but it would be really nice because I appreciated your perspective on the hotels, and I would just say to my colleagues that, hotels last for 50 years, and a 2-year delay or even a 3-year delay in achieving it is not that big a deal in the long term. And this might, since Mr. Baccaro confirmed that the hotel market in Hayward is going to be strong in the long term, which we think we already knew, but it's validated. A little bit of patience might be warranted in this case, rather than throwing out the plans and scrapping it just because we need to sort of pause for a year or two for what is ultimately going to be the right type of development for that site and others where we have hotels planned. So I could say a lot more, but I will stop. And thank you all. You give me a lot to think about, and I look forward to the follow-on conversations.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Salinas.
Thank you. Great presentation, and a lot to digest. So, I just wanted to reiterate that it'd be great if you can participate in the next CDC meeting. I think I learned more about hotels in the last 20 minutes than I've known in altogether. But I did have I just had a couple of questions, and there's you guys delivered a lot of information, but the first question I have is we had a company that came to the CDC some time ago, this pre-COVID, and wanted to they wanted to open up a warehouse, and it was that last mile delivery that they were really trying to get to, and and we when the committee brought up infrastructure enhancements, they were talking about they were going to have hundreds of vans that were going to be coming and going through Winton. We started talking about, well, okay, this is something that we'd like for you to think about and help us resolve. How will you alleviate the impact to the roads, particularly West Winton? And it just seemed that the I may have misread the vibe of the room, but it just seemed like the vibe in the room was like, well, they weren't really interested in talking about that. And so, I'm totally for going out and recruiting and really bringing in some of these large industries. I've always shopped local. I've always, Southland has always been one of my, go-to malls to shop. But since the pandemic, I have, used online, I've made purchases online a lot. And so I guess my question is this, is that, while Hayward is the right place and there's a lot of great things about Hayward for these large logistics and last mile companies to come to Hayward, how are they resolving, impact fees to, or just, contributing to the fortifying the infrastructure of our roads, and have other cities done similar things, and what works, what doesn't work? Like, what's the recipe, I guess, is the question, if that makes any sense. And I don't know who answers that one, but
I can try,
yeah.
Councilman Salinas, I can try.
Sure.
I think as it relates to the specific project you're speaking of, I can't comment to that. But what I could tell you that you probably felt a negative reaction, due to the fact that it was a surprise, right? And so when these occupiers are coming in to meet with representatives of the city, whomever the developer may be, and they're trying to understand a project and how they can get their operational permits and go live in the building to start their their use, they go in under the impression of the site or their use conforms to whatever was entitled there, or whatever the zoning overlay may allow. And nowhere in the fine print does it say anything about extra traffic. So when sites are going through the CEQA process and going through the EIR process, you do have to do a traffic study, and you're gonna have to, the occupier is gonna have to conform to whatever traffic study that is. So it's simply a suggestion, but the city ought to get out in front of what that traffic study is going to look like on future development sites. And I think I heard Councilman Mendel make some terrific suggestions and comments. And I think what it is it's the city being prepared to have this discussion from day one, whether it's when the developer is getting their entitlements and they know over a certain traffic count for a certain kind of fleet or a certain kind of vehicle that costs this much if you're going to go over over the amount. And then you start to balance your traffic studies as it relates to site specific. It cannot be one size fits all. Every street is different. Every access is going to be different. Every parcel is going to be different and generate a different amount of traffic. Okay, so if you know that you're going to get a traffic study that says we can go up to 2,000 vehicles at these hours of the day, you're going to know that once we hit 1,200, there's a tax. It's going to come in the form of a TIF. And if it's a 53-foot tractor trailer truck, it costs X. If it's a box van, it costs Y. If it's a Sprinter van, it costs Z. And I think it's up to the city to be responsible to have that program ready from the onset. So it's a project cost. When it comes in at the very end, it's hard to understand. And so when it's part of the entire project, it's much easier to absorb. It's very transparent. And I think the occupiers can plan around it. And I think that this would be something that the city of Hayward could be, candidly, could be a leading agency in the Bay Area to get out in front of it. There's a lot of talk about it in a lot of different cities. And I think that there's a lot of different strategies and a lot of different game plans. I think Fremont has some great ideas. I have yet to see, any uniform adoption. I think this is coming. We do not think e-commerce is going away. As you mentioned, Councilman Salinas, look, we would all love to go shop local as best we can. We're under restrictions, and the stores we know and like and shop at may not be open anymore. So this is something that we see as being extraordinarily viable. And when you think about e-commerce, think about it this way, and this will help. It certainly helped me. How many Walmarts or Targets or neighborhood shopping centers do you have in your immediate community? Take that, put it all into a warehouse. It's going somewhere, probably within your city, and they're driving to you. It's all of that rolled up into one big distribution facility with a lot of people inside working there.
So what I'm hearing is, I think what I'm hearing, and this is something that I know a lot of business owners, both large and medium-sized businesses out in the industrial area, when they want to build or expand, they're always talking about predictability, right? When they enter a process of developing or expanding, they want they want some sense of predictability. Like when they enter a process, they want to see the end of the process, and they don't want any surprises as they move through the process. So, okay.
Of course, yes. I mean, obviously, a lot of these groups are on a time schedule, and they're carrying land that's empty. So that's a big, weight. That's a big weight around the capital. So obviously, the sooner that they can get a development, the sooner they can get it leased, the sooner they can cash flow, the sooner they can hire, employees, and everybody wins. So, it's all a part of the process, and I think the transparency in the timing of the process, the transparency in the overall costs, the permit and fee schedule can be updated to include a separate section that would be for traffic impact in addition to, and it should be all tied around all the uses and how that CEQA process goes about. So from the first day, the first time they meet with one of your planners, they know this is part of the program.
Yeah. And then, I'm sorry.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
No, does that make sense? Okay.
Yes, it does. And, I have another question, but, I think I'm going to wait. I'll let it go because I think that question took enough time. So.
Okay. Well, Paul has my information. This is Jason. So if anyone has follow-up, you can coordinate through Paul or get to me. Otherwise, I can answer separately. Thank you.
Yeah. And I'll look forward to the CDC meeting so I can ask my hotel questions. So thank you.
Mayor, you're muted.
Sorry. Okay. I'm sorry. I just was going to say this has been a great discussion, and we still have a couple more council members, but I will ask everybody to try to be a little more limiting. And I do believe our presenters like Mr. Ovidia, would be opened if we funnel additional questions through Paul to follow up, and we'll also have further discussions at the Economic Development Committee. But I'll go to Councilmember Lamnon now, and then I'm sorry, just Councilmember Lamnon. That seems to be the last. Oh no, Councilmember Wahab, go ahead.
What? I think Councilmember Lamnon was ahead of me. I just clicked the button.
Well, one of you go ahead, okay?
Okay. Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Lamnon, thank you.
Thank you. So, so first of all, yes, I want to add my appreciation for putting together this presentation. It was incredibly helpful, and I look forward to a similar one around housing cost development, as we've talked about. This was outstanding. Thank you very much to everybody who put this together. And I really have one question for tonight, which may be answered by anybody, but again, to echo the mayor's comments concisely, and if it needs more conversation later, that's fine. But we hear that Hayward has retained some of its market integrity partly because we weren't overinflated. We hear that when prices are down, that can be a good time to build because then we anticipate a return in the future. And yet, Hayward often gets overlooked, and things get driven by this need to have a high return, which means that housing is not affordable, which means that retail, commercial space is not affordable, industrial space is not affordable. And so can Hayward position itself and well to capture the great benefit that we have and simultaneously encourage that slow, steady investment? So, maybe we're not the market that attracts the $1 billion investment that is supposed to get the $1 trillion return, because that $1 trillion return we've seen, people can't afford it. It's driving displacement. It's driving market crash. It's not helpful. It's not healthy. And so how do we position ourselves well to capture and encourage the slow and steady investment and then retain it? Maybe I'm unrealistic, but I got to throw it out there.
I'll go out on a limb.
Thank you.
And so first, I think I've got a few comments on this. The first is, Hayward's really interesting. You're really at a crossroads. When you look at your downtown district, you've got the 580 coming in right above it. You've got the 238 also. You connect up to Castro Valley, very easily. You connect out to Mission. You connect down to the 880. So even though the downtown district is not adjacent to a freeway, there really is a high degree of centrality. And I don't ever see Hayward being framed that way, which I think is a missed opportunity. The second point that I'll make is, and this is to the $1 billion investment with the $1 trillion return, and that is that there is no shame in hitting in hitting singles and hitting single after single after single. And as much as it pains me to acknowledge Council Member Mendel nodding, because I am a Cardinals fan and what the Red Sox have done to the Cardinals over the years is painful. I want to just say on base percentage, and so, make a list of the projects, and the sum of the singles ultimately adds up to a lot. The sum will be bigger than the parts. So those are a couple of thoughts. And and in the back, Ed.
When you're done.
I'm done.
Okay, well, I like to do a couple doubles in with the signals. So 2 or 3 things. I'm really old. So back in 1955, you remember what Hayward was like. Canneries, farms, and people wanted to preserve that. So now then we went through the next phase of suburban growth. I think there's 2 or 3 factors in the location of Hayward. Secondary airports are going to become extremely valuable. So you're going to see Hayward Airport, Livermore Airport, Santa Rosa Airport becoming the next vehicle for drone delivery and for passenger delivery as the main airports are congested. So how do you take your airport and make that a intermodal and a passenger multiplier? One of your citizens talked about what we do with education. We are missing, there's going to be a large fabrication and maker tech industry. So for every software idea of, writing software for social media, as we go into the Internet of Things and machinery becomes more internet and AI automated, who are the technicians? And these don't have to be 4-year college grads. So how are we changing Cal State and the community colleges to create and train people for these $100,000 jobs, $80,000 jobs? And so Maker Tech is going to become a major thing. So how do we keep our youth employed? Warehouse, even if you pay somebody $30 an hour, they can't afford to live in Hayward. So how do you get 60 an hour? And 60 an hour would be some kind of Maker Tech. So there's a couple things, doubles in that regard. I think that could be generators and multipliers down the road.
That's really helpful. Thank you both. So I have a few, pieces of feedback and things for us to think about as a city and for staff consideration. One, I want to add to the comments about the traffic impact fee. And Al, I appreciated your comment about the trade-off. I hadn't thought about it that way before. And I flinched early on when we talked about traffic impact fee because it felt like yet another thing we were putting on industry. But if we're talking about it as a trade-off, I think that's really brilliant. And I think I concur with the experts about, not that I have knowledge to do that, but I think there's real logic in acknowledging that, okay, if you're going to be a distribution center, therefore your impact fee looks like this. And I think there were some good examples of what those thresholds would be. I think also, and again, And I know Councilmember Marquez and Salinas talked about the impact fee as well. And then one of the things that Councilmember Mendel has talked about for years, which I support, is as we think about spaces and creating spaces, that those not be specifically designed to be X, that they be flexible spaces, that the walls can be moved easily, that the code allows for transition. And so to the extent we can do that ahead of time, great. To the extent that we can streamline our processes now, and maybe as we look at our strategic planning and economic development planning and development planning over the next year or so in light of COVID and all of the changes that are happening in the organization, I'm thinking that we probably need to prioritize spending some staff time or consultant time on developing some streamlined processes. You know, we wanted more solar, so we created a streamlined process for solar applicants. We probably need to repurpose our retail space. So can we streamline some applicants that get us, and not just repurpose the space, but what is it we want? Is it co-working? Is it, what are the sectors that are growing that we want to attract? And can we streamline our process to facilitate that? That I acknowledge that's going to take work and resources. And so I'm open to talking through how do we position ourselves well for that. But I think it's an investment well spent. And lastly, I was heartbroken to hear the idea that we were not growing the workforce that was needed for industries. We're a town with a university and a college, and more than one college. And how could that possibly be? And so I think I offer this challenge to the Promise Neighborhoods group. I think is probably the place that it sits. Councilmember Salinas can disagree with me, but the idea that is a coalition of our city, and for some segment of the Promise Neighborhoods group to meet with industry and really tease out, okay, what are the service, the knowledge gaps that are not keeping jobs in Hayward or keeping employees in Hayward in the jobs that are coming into the community. I think there's a real opportunity there, and I'd love to see us capitalize on that. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll go to Councilmember Wahab now.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the presentation. I appreciate staff's work. I appreciate everybody that went through this 91-page slide. And as was relayed, it was a lot of information. I do hope that people take a look at it, and I look forward to contacting some of you folks. I do just want to hit the overall feeling, and I'll just kind of go over very generally. I think that it just reiterates the many frustrating arguments I've had regarding pretty much everything you guys have presented. I will say that some of the examples that you guys have given is something that is semi in the works. So for example, I know our airport subcommittee meeting this week, we will be talking about, I don't want to say private jets, but basically usage in a different way for that kind of like JetX and so forth. So that is definitely coming. We are talking about a hotel on the airport property and so much more. So I know that the city has been kind of taking a look at that, and it literally happened just because, I spoke to our director of public works and so forth and staff there and saying, can we ask for any of these industries to come into Hayward? And one of the things I want to highlight is when we talk about economic development, I do believe in flexibility, and it's not just one industry that we need to, ask to come into the city. It has to be a diversified set of industries. And the reason for that is because it makes the city stronger. It makes the city stronger if we ensure that we have a diverse economic base. And, some of the conversations regarding our demographics, one of the reasons why it's so important to have the city in partnership and regular conversation with the schools is to also talk about some of these concerns that we are having. I constantly hear that the reason why businesses and development does not take place in Hayward is because of our workforce, as well as the residual land value due to our school systems, or pretty much anything under that belt. So I do want to say that I personally view it as our responsibility to engage these groups, to reach out, to be a part, and be very open to what is needed for us to get things done. One of the things that I do appreciate out of this presentation was the focus on millennials. And it is one of the growing populations that we have within the demographics. The city is a relatively young city, just by averages, if you will. And the disposable income versus rents and home ownership. Consistently, I think we've talked about how difficult home ownership is. And one of the items that we just passed earlier tonight was to just make sure that we kind of hit or have a safety net for a lot of varieties of things we can do in regards to housing. One being a down payment assistance program, potentially being funded by the state. So I really do appreciate that from staff as well. And I want to highlight parking. I know I bring up parking quite often, and I know it's a random thing, but the reason why the successful downtowns are successful is because they do have parking, whether it's not in downtown, but it's like slightly moved to a corner, or it's a very large parking garage or parking structure. And families and residents and even visitors can take a look at whatever amenities are available for longer periods of time without worrying, okay, my car, I have a 2-hour parking limit or something like that. So I do want to highlight some of those things. One large investment in a parking structure can kind of take care of a lot of other things. I do also want to highlight the comparison between San Francisco to Fremont and Hayward smack dab in the middle. And at the same time, we have a lot of difficulties, competing with these two cities. One of the things I do want to say is the marketing of Hayward. I just heard that, even though we're sitting in 3 freeways and so forth, it's not as promoted. I would have to agree to a degree. I also agree that we need to spend more of the effort from the city's perspective of promoting the city in a positive manner. But again, very, very broad. Toss a wide net and see what you can catch with it, in a sense. I will also say that office structures, even though we're all working in our home, I think that a lot of us kind of want a routine to get out of the house. I know I want one. I have memberships to Workday and WeWork and so forth, and so it's interesting to see how that plays into it. And then the commercial district, one of the things that I do want the city of Hayward to do is really focus on other parts of Hayward as well. So downtown, the industrial and so forth, and develop partnerships. For example, there is the Hayward Business Association. I know we often rely on talking to the chamber. I do think that they have some great ideas. I think the owner of Brews and Brats wants to kind of open up a open door or open air, dining experience, if you will. It's kind of more for his business and so forth. But he shared the idea this past weekend, and I thought it was a really good one. And then in regards to resiliency with retail, I know earlier this year, I think I mentioned it in our workshops that we had earlier in January, that the mixed use spaces that we have where retail's on the bottom and housing up top and so forth. I know that model has consistently been, people have tried to replicate it and I stated that it may not work because, we've tried to do this multiple times. I know I spoke to our director of planning in regards to this, is that I just want us to be very, very open, in short, very, very not say that, okay, this system worked for this city. We are a very unique city, very unique demographics, very unique position and geography, to be completely frank. And I want us to be far more open-minded in what is possible. I do appreciate this particular workshop, if you will, primarily because we need to understand from the experts, but then if we are moving forward on an idea, it shouldn't just be one idea at a time. I do think that we kind of, again, need to do our best to work in what's happening in the future. And when we talk about development and so forth, I don't care what industry we're talking about, but we have to think 20 plus years ahead. And we already know the trends. So I really do appreciate the Internet of Things and automation and all those conversations that were shared in the last couple minutes or so, because we can't do things based on how it was done 20 plus years ago or so forth. So I really want to highlight that. I also want to, the impact fees have been brought up a couple of times. Oftentimes I see a pattern where we sometimes ignore some of these impact fees or reduce them or so forth to entice businesses. And I think that we need to prioritize which impact fees we actually want to set as, I don't want to say mandatory, but more of a priority that, it's equal across the board. And then which impact fees are we going to be taking a look at that we are flexible on depending on what industry is coming forward. And I want to highlight again that in regards to housing, I think it's incredibly difficult. I know that rents went down, dipped very low in Hayward, and they're still going up at the same time in depending on which complex you talk to. Housing is still a significant concern. I do appreciate all the work that we have been doing around housing, but I will say that if people are unable to stay in the same place for a longer period of time, we cannot build the stability and the pride in a community. And the reason why I say that is because the example of Fremont being brought up so many times, Fremont has historically was originally a senior town, and then it kind of migrated into a family town. With us having such a high renter population and rents consistently going up, people move, their children move from school to school, depending on what district they're in. There's a little bit lack of quality of life and so forth, and that creates some of these other concerns that we have in our city. So the reason why I stress housing and economic development are the two things that make this city what it is. So I really, again, appreciate all the work. Thank you, Mayor, for allowing me to share my thoughts.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that everyone did feel free. I realize this has gone on far longer than anybody realized or estimated. However, it has been a very healthy discussion. And I'll say a few things here. The flexibility part, I've been saying that for a long time. We can't just look to, we want retail, we want this kind of retail. That trend has been changing for a while now, and we know that. And I've talked about things like childcare, gyms, we just had a discussion about gyms, but recreation, things like that. I think also the arts, we need to think about, we have a strong arts community in Hayward, and that is also something that can create that activity around the place that can help support some retail and bring people together. Obviously, the easier development process is something we have been working on. We have really worked and I think accomplished a lot over the years, but the transportation impact fee is something we definitely should look at, and just being more upfront and trying to find ways to make it easier for development. I think, it's interesting. We talked about malls and how they're changing. We have a mall. I don't really know what's going to happen to it. Obviously, it's got some problems in terms of being very close to our airport, but then we just heard our airport is potentially also a very other significant asset here. So I think the Hesperian Boulevard corridor is going to be an increasing focus for us to look at in terms of, increasing our, growing our economy. I want to again, and it ties into so many things we said, the support for families and children and education and the health of children. And again, I would talk about recreation and the arts and things for families to do. So we have a lot of families, we have a lot of children. All of those things help children learn too, and help children become more likely to succeed in school and be able to grow into those jobs that right now you're saying we don't have the workforce for. Promotion of the city. Had you heard of, we do call ourselves the heart of the Bay. And while I like to say that, in part refers to our heart, our generosity, our spirit, but it also, it really does, I think, come more from the fact that we are at this central location. We have always tried to market ourselves that way. So I'd appreciate any suggestions on how we can do that better. And finally, I'll just say, I worry about, we know what's happening right now due to COVID. We also have the climate forces and factors affecting us and right now and severely this summer and for the past several years, the fires. And I don't want anybody to even try to answer this question right now, but I do think it's a big question about what the long-term impact of what we're going through right now is going to be, or whether it is going to be a long-term impact, or we're going to immediately go back to the way we used to live, where we like to come together in crowds and, do things indoors and things like that. So that's something that I don't know that anybody could answer, but it bothers me in terms of how can we really plan for the future when we're not exactly sure what these current crises are going to, what impact they're going to have on people's psyches. So I'm just going to end this with that question and thank all of you for joining us tonight and for bringing us this information. Thank the economic development staff for bringing this together. This is obviously a conversation that's going to continue for quite some time. So thank you, everybody, for your input. And with that, if everybody's okay, and I don't see any other requests to speak at the moment, so we will now move on to item number 10, which I know we have some people waiting to hear and participate in. So item number 10 is adoption of a resolution of intention to establish the Old Highlands Benefit District to levy and collect assessments for street improvements. That's basically the topic. So we are going to, I believe, start this one off. Are we going to start it off with you, Mr. Ameri, or with Ms. Garcia, or?
Yes, with me. Thank you, Madam Mayor, and good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. We are very excited to be here this evening to present the resolution to a long-standing issue of Old Highlands roadways condition. This issue has been around, as you know, for over 50 years with various attempts to resolve the issue being unsuccessful, at least so far. With the leadership from council and the OHA board, we have arrived at a solution that could result in improving the community streets without unreasonable cost burden on the residents. Kathy Garcia, our Deputy Director of Public Works, is here to present a short presentation. Kathy?
Okay. Hi, this is the first public hearing for the Benefit Assessment District for the Old Highland Homeowners Association, also known as OHA, Pavement Improvement Project. Next slide, please. This public hearing is for the following: to establish an assessment district for the OHA Pavement Improvement Project, to levy and collect assessment for pavement improvements, to order an engineer's report, to set a time and place for Proposition 218 hearing, which staff recommends January 26, 2021. Next slide, please. Okay. The streets within OHA consist of 6.1 miles that were not brought up to city standards when the area was annexed in 1963. The city and the OHA board have engaged in numerous discussions regarding pavement improvements to the area's streets. In 2010, the assessment district was overwhelmingly rejected by property owners. In 2017 and 18, discussions between the city and the OHA board resumed, resulting in a tentative agreement for an OHA pavement improvement cost sharing project. Next slide, please. Staff and the OHA board agreed to the following: a 50-50 cost-sharing pavement repair of the estimated total cost of a $6.5 million project. Estimated cost per year per property owner is $670 over 20 years. The cost is at a 2% interest. At zero interest, the cost is $557 per year per owner. The city will improve 1 to 2 streets per year over a period of 5 to 6 years. The improvements will consist of 20-foot wide pavement treatments for one-way streets and 24-foot wide pavement treatments for two-way streets. The project does not include curb, gutter, or stormwater improvements. When preparing the engineer's design, when possible, the city will not disturb existing water control features along the OHA roadways installed by property owners to divert stormwater away from their properties. If the city cannot preserve some features, then the existing features, which currently provide limited stormwater protection, will be replaced with comparable features to provide stormwater diversion similar to that provided by the original features. Many of the properties in OHA have deferred improvement agreements. These stipulate certain improvements are the responsibility of the property owner. All deferred improvement agreements will be voided. The city will prepare all documents and filings necessary to achieve these property dedications. The city will assume all future maintenance of the streets within the OHA area. Next slide, please. Here is a summary of the 50-50 cost sharing, the reimbursement period, and the tentative start date. The work is to be funded equally by the city and OHA property owners. The project is expected to be completed over 5 to 6 years. The total project cost is estimated at $6.5 million. The cost per property owner per year is $670, which is at 2% interest. The city will provide the initial funding, with property owners reimbursing 50% of the total cost over a 20-year period. Pending majority in favor vote, the estimated start date will be scheduled in mid-2021. Slide, please. Okay. The priority of the order in which the streets will be improved is to be determined by the OHA board. They have mentioned that Cotati and Tribune will be the first to be treated. The funding will come from the annual pavement rehabilitation project, or approximately $1 million per year. Slide, please. Next slide. Oh, there we go. Okay. This is a typical section of the improvements, showing the 20-foot one-way street improvements and 24 two-way street improvements. And on the left is a list of which streets are one-way streets and which streets are two-way streets. You can see there. Okay. Next slide, please. And here's a map of the properties in OHA. The pink depicting the parcels with the deferred improvement agreements, and then the blue is without the agreements. Okay. Next slide. The next steps are preparing the engineer's report, setting the next public hearing, which the staff recommends to be January 26, 2021. And the ballots will be sent to the property owners, and then the ballots will be counted at the public hearing on January 26, 2021, if the council sets that date. Okay. And now we'll take your questions. Thank you.
I don't see any council questions. Okay, I see Council Member Salinas raising his hand. I mean,
I apologize. I should have lifted my finger on the thing, but I didn't. But the one question I had, and I saw an email, and the one question I have is it true that OHA actually agrees to this plan?
Well, I would say we will be.
Yes, I think this is a mutually agreed upon plan, and I see a couple of the OHA board members raising their hands to speak in public comment. But yes, this has been a mutually agreed upon plan. They've done some preliminary canvassing of the neighborhood. And it appears that this plan is acceptable and will be voted on by a majority of the homeowners in the area.
So for fear of blowing the vibe, I'm not going to ask any more questions.
Yes, let's not blow the vibe. But I do see that Councilmember Marquez may have a question. Did you want to withdraw that, or?
I'll be quick. So this has been reviewed on the infrastructure committee. So just thank staff for all their great work and the partnership with the board. Obviously needs to be a majority approval in order to move forward. Is that correct? From the homeowners, and it's 1 vote per household. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And assuming that it passes, I understand the timeline for the work, but what are the safeguards if a homeowner defaults and doesn't pay back the agreed terms? What happens in that situation?
It's basically an assessment on their taxes. So as they pay their taxes, this assessment is also collected.
Okay. And
it transfers from property owner to property owner if the home is sold. So it runs with the property. It does not run with the homeowner.
Okay. And if they don't pay their taxes, that would result in a lien in the property. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Zermano.
Very quickly, to whom do we owe this great development?
To City Council and OHA Board.
Yeah, I will give kudos to both our former Public Works Director, Murad Fakhrai, who did some of the initial legwork, and then Alex Amiri, our current Director of Public Works, who really has brought it across the finish line in partnership with the OHA board, who have worked tirelessly to help really sort of advocate for this in the neighborhood. So I just want to, and also the Public Works team and the City Attorney's Office for designing and developing the benefit district and putting all of the logistics together to get that done. So they won't say it, but I will give them huge kudos.
All right. So my compliments and my thanks to them all, and also to the board from all Highlands. Thank you.
And I have to say that I have great admiration. This staff, the city manager, the public works director, everybody who's worked on this has accomplished something that has been tried and failed many times before, and we aren't quite there yet. So I
was going to say, don't say that yet. We still have to get across the vote.
I do have to give a lot of credit to, I believe, someone who is still with us and wants to speak and is first in line to do that, and that is Robert Carlson, who lives up there and who really got, knocked on our door again and said, please, can we try to do something here? And I think that started the ball rolling again a few years ago after staff had kind of given up. So with that, I'm going to open public comment on this item. And Madam City Clerk, you are still with us, aren't you? But I do believe Mr. Carlson is the first in line, according to my attendee list, to speak. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mayor Halliday. And I'm now going to allow Mr. Carlson to speak. Please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Good evening. I just want to make sure Mark's question is clearly answered. And the board has worked a long time with the city staff to reach this agreement. Yeah, there might be a tweaking or two left to do before the ballot actually goes out the door. Some wordage and so forth, but the substance of that agreement is, we all agree to it. We are grateful that the solution has finally raised its head. There's a lot of people up here figuratively dancing in the streets because of it. And I want to thank the City Council for giving it the consideration it has. And I hope I'm looking forward in the next few minutes to seeing a milestone in this project that I've worked on since 2007. So thank you all. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you. The next speaker we have is Bijan, and I'm going to go ahead and allow to speak. Please go ahead and unmute yourself. Thank you.
they'll say it's me.
Hi, this is Bruce Barrett and Joy Rowan here on the same computer. And we've lived in OHA for many years and are not a stranger to this streets controversy. And I really want to thank everyone in the city and also our board for working so hard for this. I think, I hope we're really well represented tonight at the meeting, because I think so many people are really looking forward to this thing getting resolved. And so thank you to everyone. Want to say anything?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. And I believe we have another speaker, Bijan. Would you please go ahead and unmute yourself?
Evening. Hi.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Well, first answering question from Council Member Salinas. Yes, we agreed. I think it is about time after 50 years that we have to something that we don't have choice. But I want to appreciate Council Member who made contribution to this decision-making process and noticed our streets. Some of you came to the street and noticed that this is really bad. Highland area is the most valuable area in the city of Hayward. I'm proud of my house. Anytime that someone says, oh, Hayward is not a good place, I say, come to see my house. But unfortunately, when they come to the street, they say, oh, what is this street? But anyway, I want to thank council members and city manager, public works director, Mr. Amiri, particularly our representative, OHA representative, Bob Carson. Thank you for all. Thank you all for everything, for the efforts. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
And I don't see any other, there are no other speakers, correct?
That's correct, Mayor Halliday.
All right, so we'll go back to council and we'll go back to Councilmember Salinas, who has his hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. So, I remember Dr. Carlson, this was when, this was one of the very first meetings I had when I got on the council, and I met with Dr. Carlson at Pete's, and I'll tell you what it just seemed like a complex issue, very expensive, and it was just so many different moving, all these different moving parts, and then we were close to something, and then we weren't close to something, and then years go by. Anyways, I'm just so glad this is finally coming to fruition. We're moving forward to this. I know the Mr. Murad Farkrai, I know he invested a lot of time and effort in this, and I know Mr. Ameri, same thing. And so for fear of it falling apart, it brings me great pleasure to move staff's recommendation.
I would like to second that myself, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to take mayor's prerogative and second that motion. Councilmember Zermeño.
Yes. Am I mute? No, I'm not mute. Okay. I remember very well being driven all over the Highlands by Mr. Carlson, who was my president at that time of Richard College, and he was very insistent. We need to do this. We need to do this. My apologies, Mr. Carlson, for having us taken what I think 4 years since that drive along the Highlands. So I'm happy to support the motion. Thank you.
All right, and I don't see any other requests. I will just say that I especially I call it Mr. Carlson because he, I think a few of us did ride-alongs with him to really see the area. But I also remember one night when I was in December when it was very, very dark and I was trying to find a house belonging to friends I have up there a house I had visited many times, and somehow I got turned around and lost and just completely scared about getting out alive because it was dark. I knew what those streets were like. I knew I could go off a cliff, in a few different places there. And I remember having a discussion with the city attorney about, the potential, I hate to bring up liability, but that we really needed to do something because safety was an issue too. And I think that there were some fixes made, at that point, some quick fixes. But I am so glad that the homeowners association up there really kept at this, got their residents together after some failures before, and it looks like we're going to move forward with this now, and it's the right and the fair thing to do. Councilmember Wahab.
Thank you, Mayor. I actually just want to highlight the fact that going up to that area, I actually do think it's a very nice neighborhood. I appreciate the work that staff does. I apologize to the members of the board that you guys had to wait this long just to hear your talking item. So again, I do appreciate the efforts of staff and really support this. So thank you.
Councilmember Marquez.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to acknowledge the residents, the board members, and Dr. Carlson for your persistence and your patience while we get to this point. Also remember a packed meeting in the infrastructure committee where even Assemblymember Bill Quirk came. He used to live in that neighborhood. So there has been a lot of community engagement around this topic. And I also appreciate Dr. Carlson. It's probably been about 4 years since I took my tour up there when you shared with me. We walked your neighborhood and drove, and I'm well aware of the safety concerns in that community. So I think this is a fair and equitable approach, and hope that the residents take it to heart and really respect the work, primarily of the board of decades worth of work to get to this point, and also our staff. I know you've had many, many community conversations and meetings to get to this point. So with that, I'll be happy to support the motion.
And with that and no further comments, I will ask the city clerk to please do a roll call vote on this motion by Councilmember Salinas, seconded by myself.
Yes, Madam Mayor, thank you. And I just wanted to confirm that the motion includes the revised resolution, page 2 of the resolution, item 4. I think there is a date change for the public hearing from December 1st to January 26, 2021. Just wanted to reflect that.
Okay, thank you for pointing that out. I didn't, but yes, it does include that. Or Councilmember Salinas.
Yes.
Yes, and I agree too. Yes.
Great. Thank you so much. And Councilmember Lamnin.
With much appreciation, aye.
Councilmember Marquez.
Aye.
Councilmember Mendel.
Good work, everyone. Yes.
Councilmember Salinas.
Absolutely.
Councilmember Wahab.
Yes.
Councilmember Cermeño.
Yes.
Mayor Halliday.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Too bad we couldn't resolve our economic development discussion and so quickly and easily, but thank you everybody for that. And with that, we will move on to comments from our city manager.
I actually do not have any comments this evening, so I will pass.
All right. So we'll move on to council reports and referrals, council reports and comments. Councilmember Wahab.
Thank you, Mayor. I just really want to thank staff. I actually really appreciate the workshop. If we could kind of maybe chop it in half, and focus on whatever industry or whatever topic we want to focus on. I have historically seen that these workshops, when we get information from some of these, let's say, subject matter experts, it whether we're talking about housing, whether we're talking about domestic violence, whether we're talking about, health, economy, so forth. It's very informational, number one. Number two, it's also, it's really good to get, the latest trends and also have the public kind of be aware of some of these things too. So I really appreciate that. If we are able to do that, I'm going to say quarterly if I'm pushing it, but as regularly as possible, I think it's incredibly important. Even if that's twice a year, I'm fine with it. Also, I do just want to acknowledge the fact that it also allows the public to kind of understand with some of the things we're dealing with, that, we have the information because we read so much of the staff reports and have some side conversations, if you will. So I really appreciate that. I really want us to start focusing on economic development as much as possible, because it is very much what makes or breaks a city in downturn. So really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Salinas.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask the city manager to deliver a message to the streets and maintenance team, over the last few weeks, but I mean, we can go back to the beginning of the pandemic, but, especially over the last, month or so, I personally have called in some horrendous, jobs of illegal dumping and, and just horrendous hot spots around South Hayward and around downtown area. But I've also received a lot of positive feedback from neighbors throughout the city on just, response time and just the when they're out there, they do talk to the neighbors sometimes and they inform them about, process and what to do. And anyways, they're just doing a great job. And I just wanted to, if you can just pass that along to our maintenance team. It's a tough job out there right now. I get it. And, but there's a lot of folks out there deeply appreciative for what the work they do. So please tell them that.
I will absolutely pass that along. And I did also, I can share, I did, given some of the feedback that the council had expressed and given how far behind we had gotten on some of the Access Hayward requests, I did authorize overtime for a period of weekends for the crews to go out and do some additional work. Last weekend, for those who have not been out to the Tennyson, Whitman, and Huntwood area, there were actually 6 two-person crews out there over the weekend, basically working together, getting rid of illegal signage, graffiti, dumping, windblown trash, weeds. So I have a couple of the before and after pictures, but Director Ruhlman was going to send me kind of a synopsis of what the end result was. So it's called Operation Clean Sweep, and we will be doing it in a number of neighborhoods throughout the community over the course of the next probably 4 to 6 weeks, and really just to try and get caught up on a lot of the trash and debris that has accumulated during the pandemic. So I echo the thanks to our crews who are out there.
Okay, Council Members Armenio.
And thank you, Kelly, for cleaning that corner of Tennyson and 880. However, there's still some more junk on that intersection. So I don't know if it was done by our city or if we actually got Caltrans to do it.
That was probably Caltrans, so we can request them to go out there again. So.
Finally, all right, but they still have a huge pile. Thanks a lot.
Okay. I have a couple of brief reports to make tonight. One is regarding the action we took a couple of weeks ago prior to the League of California Cities annual conference, which was last week, where you directed me as the voting delegate for Hayward to vote against a general resolution that was on that agenda that would have made it league policy to urge Congress to change a rule, and I believe it's the communications code, to make social media companies more responsible and more directly responsible for crime, for supporting crimes on their platforms, I guess, for allowing postings on their platforms that support crime. And of course, and this council had a pretty vigorous discussion. There are a lot of First Amendment issues involved in that. So I did go and represent on both the Resolutions Committee and at the General Assembly that position. I'm sorry to report that the resolution did get approved by the General Assembly, not with my vote, but it was a very, again, a very vigorous discussion and a very split vote. It was 122 to 85 at the General Assembly in favor of supporting this resolution. However, obviously this annual conference was held completely online on Zoom this year, and there was not quite a quorum. There were a few votes short of a quorum at the General Assembly. Therefore, while the resolution did receive more votes than, the yes vote was higher than the no vote. The vote doesn't really count as league policy at this point because there wasn't a quorum. And so the matter is being referred to the league board, which I don't believe, based on a conversation I had with our league liaison this morning, that discussion hasn't happened yet. It may happen in early December. I think that's when the next board meeting is. So if I hear any more, I'll keep you posted. But that is what happened with that resolution. And the other thing I was going to mention briefly is that it came up a little bit tonight about I as a member of the ABAG executive board, I did have a chance to vote on the blueprint for Bay Area 2050 plan that they've been working a long time on developing. There's a lot in this plan. There's a lot. And the one thing that bothers me a little is I'm not sure it's fully taking into consideration the potential impacts of the pandemic, but there's a lot of good stuff. And I would urge you all to take a look at either the MTC or the ABAG website and review it. The one thing that was mentioned tonight about this mandatory mandating that office employers have 60% of their workforce working at home on any given day. I raised an objection, even though I did support the blueprint. It's a huge thing that this just seemed not right to me, and that it was a real imposition on employers to have to even calculate that or keep track of it, and it has raised a lot of opposition throughout the Bay Area. But just keep an eye on that. I mean, developing the blueprint doesn't mean everything's going to happen tomorrow. This is a plan for, Bay Area 2050, so long range. But you might want to take a look in that. A lot of stuff really ties into the discussion that we had tonight on economic development here. So with that, there's no one else I'm not seeing. We will move on to our adjournments, and we do have a couple of, we're going to adjourn in memory of a couple of people this evening, sadly. The first I'll mention is Nicholas Arantes. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And this gentleman was not only a Hayward native and lifelong resident, but he had a 32-year career with the Hayward Fire Department, which began in 1949, and it ended in, I think it was 1981. During that career, he developed the department's Fire Prevention Bureau. He became its leader and chief inspector. He served as a battalion chief, and he was an active member of the California State Firefighters Association. And had some positions there. So and especially our fire department, we will all very much miss Mr. Arantes, this lifelong Hayward native and firefighter. And I'll just mention that his obituary did mention that gifts in his memory could be made to the Hayward Area Historical Society. And then David Paul Krug passed away just within the last couple of weeks. And Dave was a consummate musician whose motto was "Music is Life." He was He taught instrumental music in the Hayward Unified School District for over 30 years. And he also sang in a couple of area choruses, the Oakland Symphony Chorus and the San Francisco Chamber Choir, which he was still singing at the time that he became ill and passed away. Always the life of a party, and could play a tune, any tune requested. And I will mention that I know that he was right beside his loving partner, Judy Harrison, who, as the president of the Friends of the Hayward Library, really was very instrumental in getting Measure C passed and getting our Friends of the Hayward Public Library is one of them, as well as the choirs that he served in, and also Scholarships, Inc. He was an educator. And so at this point, and I would ask staff to work with both of their families to look for an opportunity to plant a tree someday when we can do that again in each of their memories. So in honor and memory of Nicholas Arantes and David Krug, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.